Leave the company.
This company.
You're going to bankrupt your mama's company?
At least I have the radio to keep me company.
On 93.5 and 107.5, The Fan.
In Indianapolis. For that matter, it's a Hump Day Wednesday everywhere in the world, really. I guess, like, right now in New Zealand, is it still Wednesday? In Australia? Are they ahead of us?
I believe they're ahead of us. I think so.
Okay. Well, we'll just pretend that they're not, and it's Hump Day Wednesday for everybody. Actually, I can tell you, they're 16 hours ahead of us, so it is actually Thursday morning there. But good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Quarry. Jimmy Cook here as well. Eddie Garrison is back. We had just sent out an all-point bulletin for him because he's been gone for – what were you gone, Eddie, like a week and a half?
Pretty much that's what it felt like.
Where did you go? Anywhere fun?
No.
You just
– It's a staycation, Jake.
Got to spend some time with the dogs. That was about it.
the dogs?
Yeah. Joey and Yogi.
I thought you had a cat.
We have a cat and 2 dogs.
Does the cat get along with the dogs?
Yeah, he likes to play with the dogs when he's up for it.
Are the dogs, what do they think of the cat?
Yogi is a corgi, so he's very protective when Joey and the cat start playing. So Yogi goes crazy when the 2 start playing. It's like almost a sense of jealousy because he's like, hey, this was my friend before he was your friend.
You know, Yogi should meet my cat, right? It would only be fitting.
Yeah.
Since my cat's name is Boo, it would be Yogi and Boo Boo, right?
That would work.
Uh-huh.
Perfectly fitting.
Yeah.
Indiana last night, big win in Michigan, and that was one of those games, Jimmy. First, I guess the big question is, did you watch the game? Because this is the first of 5 for people that are not used to it that is going to be on Peacock. And look, this is the way, and get used to it now. I know that there are people that are like, where is Indiana? I can't watch the game. This is going to start happening more and more and more, and we can go into a whole different talk show on that. But because eventually I think as teams figure this out, eventually my curiosity, and this is a different segue, but how long is it before teams themselves just decide they're going to control all the broadcasts? I guess the TV rights money is such that it would be foolish for them to do that. But if they can eventually figure out how they take in all revenue. So for those that don't know, I believe this is correct. Like, for example, I won't say any network names, but like if a network goes to a team and pays them in their league a broadcast right, then they take in, the network does, all of the revenue from it, right? So what happens when teams eventually say, you know what, the amount of money they're paying us is, if we just go ahead and do our own revenue, our own advertising, eventually that is going to exceed the amount of money that a network is paying us. I mean, eventually, I don't think it's going to be for probably 10 years, but eventually it's going there, right?
I mean, for some, yes. I don't know the full-scale profitability for, like, the lower-end teams of the Big Ten, right?
Fair.
Like, it becomes...
or even, for that matter, even, you know, the Sacramento Kings versus the Lakers, right?
Sure.
I mean, you know, you have a revenue sharing and that kind of thing.
And you still have at that juncture, though, even though you have revenue sharing around the league, you're still able to broadcast your own games than your own network and hire your own people. The NBA is kind of trying to get a hold on that right now as the MLB of having a more centralized control where you don't have these regional sports networks. And again, this is a area that we don't want to go down too much because there's a lot of weeds to get through in that. But in terms of whatever happened collegiately, I mean, Notre Dame does it right now. So you know it works for a top brand. The question is, how many schools would it work for?
Correct. Well, Indiana's one of those from a basketball standpoint that has some cachet. But last night on Peacock, you said you did watch it, right?
I did. You could still password share with Peacock. So I happened to use a friend's
Eddie,
login to be able to get that.
Did he loan you his password?
I did not loan him
password.
mine, and he did not loan me his.
Did Jimmy loan you? Did he offer his password?
No.
Okay. And did you watch the game?
I did.
Were you stealing somebody else's password?
Potentially.
Okay. So
Not gonna
neither
name
one of you
names.
guys had the courtesy or the generosity within you to offer to me your password.
Well, but here's why I wouldn't have had it. And
I didn't know
it's
you
my
did not
fault for
have Peacock.
asking, knowing that you didn't have it. But 2, since it wasn't my original login, because it's not mine, it's somebody else's, I would feel like I would need to then go ask them, hey, do you care if I pass this along again?
So here's the thing. I don't have Peacock, open disclaimer, and I know that people, especially IndyCar people, immediately are going to jump on me for that, maybe rightly so, but keep in mind, I think a lot of people had Peacock unless you're a Notre Dame football locally, right? People around here that would have had Peacock, their introduction to it would have been to watch races, right?
Yep.
To watch IndyCar races.
Yep.
Well, I'm at those races. So, like, I'm not home to watch it, right? I'm calling the race, so I'm not watching it. I did have Peacock initially, and I thought, to be honest with you, that I still had it. So I was at Shannon's last night, and I'm like, oh, we got to watch the Indiana game. And, then we pulled it up or whatever, and by then it was in the second half, and I'm like, okay, I'll just, we'll deal with this later. So I listened to the game, followed it online, and Indiana with a nice win. And the two players I think that were really big, actually three. And Jeff Rabjohns is going to join us at 2 o'clock today to talk about this and more. Kel'el Ware is a kind of a unicorn because he is obviously a big player, a tall player that is multi-skilled. And he made a great play. Number one, he obviously hit a big basket for them down the stretch. Indiana was very balanced. Every player that played last night scored at least 6 points. I thought C.J. Gunn had some nice defensive plays. They've got to do something about being able to finish in transition. But C.J. Gunn, we talked to Don Fisher about this earlier in the week, the fact that he was thought that C.J. Gunn, the thought was that he was a shooter, and that was the reason he was there. And, I think he showed a little bit more just in terms of his athleticism last night, which was big. And then Malik Reneau, I think, continues to benefit. Malik Reneau I really like because when they had, remember Deron Davis, the kid, and unfortunately he got hurt, kind of derailed his career. But what you really, really benefit from or really want, to be honest with you, is to get a player that looks like he is that you anticipate is a one-and-done guy that turns out to be a really good player but not necessarily an NBA-ready player, and so therefore you get them for multiple years. And I think Malik Reneau is going to be that guy. He has like a Trace Jackson Davis level sustainability within the program about him, but I think he's really – and he's a very good player, so I'm not taking this away from him. I'm saying it as a positive towards him. But I think he's benefiting from, for example, Kel'el Ware underneath to kind of draw defenses away from him a little bit. And he's played well. But Ware at the end of the game, to me, it was, I guess, ironic. Was Stephen Bardo on the call for that game?
Yes.
Him and Jack Collinsworth.
So for Stephen Bardo to be on the call for that game made me chuckle. And I'm going to go on the way back here. But in terms of 2-point game, length of the floor, need to get a shot to win, for Indiana fans at Michigan, first off, I mean, they didn't need a 3, they needed a 2, but seeing Alford go the length of the floor comes to mind to show that the game's never over. And then, like, last-second shots for Michigan, Henderson's block comes to mind. Loy-Vaught, Mark Hughes missing shots come to mind. That's all on the way back. But the one that I thought of was Stephen Bardo was there for it. When Indiana played Illinois in '89, and I know I'm going back 36 years ago or 34 years ago, but there's a reason for it. When Nick Anderson hit the shot that buried Indiana, even though Indiana went on to win the Big Ten, and that game, one that I think a lot of Indiana fans that were around for it still recall vividly, for all of Bob Knight's coaching brilliance, the one thing that I think befuddled people then was why they didn't put anybody in the inbound passer. They wanted to double who was going to get the pass as opposed to putting anybody on the passer. Same with the Grant Hill, Christian Laettner play. And last night you saw what happens when you put a big on the inbound passer, and Kel'el Ware made a huge play. I mean, that was a huge play. Like,
it was comical. It was truly comical. It was Michigan just going for a baseball pass, and Ware's just standing there initially using his size and wingspan, and then just an impressive vertical leap.
Well, that's
basically
the thing.
Plucks it out of the air and then catches it.
The athleticism to be able to do that is incredible, right?
Yep.
But you have to put somebody on the passer in order to do that.
Correct.
And I don't know because I wasn't watching Peacock, obviously, but I don't know if Stephen Bardo even thought or even commented on the fact of, like, we've seen this movie with Indiana before, and they didn't guard the passer, and they got burnt by it in one of the more famous moments in Assembly Hall history. So, that it had to have come into his mind. But at any rate, obviously a great play, a reason why you have a guy like that out there. And Kel'el Ware is a player, Jimmy, that when he came from Oregon, what was the knock on him? What was the narrative about Kel'el Ware?
People said it was an effort thing with him primarily, or he would fade and he wasn't always all in.
Right.
That was the primary.
That was Dana Altman's thing about him. And you're talking about a guy that was a 5-star recruit. I mean, this is a guy that was literally a top 15, top 20 recruit. I mean, one of the biggest recruits in the country, goes to Oregon, and then and I'll use a buzzword here, his lack of motor, his lack of being totally dialed in came into play, and as a result of that, he ends up transferring to Indiana, and now is he a one and done for Indiana? Probably, right?
Could be. I mean, it's relatively early to have that. Look, I never, and I'm not saying you did, Jake, I never really bought into that full narrative because those type of comments happen all the time whenever a player transfers. Like, oh, this is why it really didn't work out here. This is the type of player that he is. And that wasn't, again, always directly from Coach Altman. It was more just the national conversation around him. So, you know me, I'm more of a glass half full guy. I want to be able to give him a fair shake here at Indiana, see what he can do. And to this point, passing with flying colors. Great defensively, making big plays offensively when they need it. I want to go back to another point you brought up in terms of players to give a shout-out to. The joke around one of my group chats is, I don't know that I've seen C.J. Gunn hit a jump shot at Indiana.
Right.
He hits 2 of them last night.
I mean, Don Fisher, when we had Don Fisher on a Monday, he's like, look, this guy came in as a shooter, and quite frankly, he's not shooting the ball well.
And he did that last night. And this is a team that, from a percentage standpoint, they are solid when they're locked in defensively. They will dominate you in the paint. They are not a team that's necessarily going to drown you from beyond the arc, though. And so if you're able to get any timely scoring from downtown like you did from Gunn, that's a plus. And then the other big thing from last night that won't get talked as much because it's not the sexy thing from IU Michigan, Xavier Johnson still out for the Hoosiers, and so you're going to be relying on a number of different rotation pieces or depth looks for who's going to fill the minutes. Gabe Cupps does that last night, draws the defensive assignment for Doug McDaniel, Michigan's leading scorer. He had 13, but he goes 3 of 14 from the field, 0 of 4 from beyond the arc. You need those kind of minutes from somebody with Xavier Johnson out, and last night it was Gabe Cupps' moment. So I'm with you. A very complete game. Some critics probably want to discount it with all the chaos right now within Michigan, but it's a win on the road. It's a win where you didn't necessarily shoot the ball lights out from beyond the arc, but you did enough, and more importantly, you limited Michigan to have a worse shooting night than you did and closed late.
How do the streaming services not have it figured out to prevent people, and I'm glad they haven't,
Sure.
but from the password sharing deal?
One has tried it, and that's Netflix. And so for instance, we had a family shared account. We'd use it with some of my in-laws.
How many people were on it?
5.
This is like when I was in college.
But I haven't subscribed to Netflix since, by the way. Like that's gone
Right.
now, and I've not.
Okay,
They did not achieve their win. They lost to me.
And I think we'll get to that. When I was in this is the 2023 version of the following. Okay, when I was in college, I lived in one of those apartments where you open the main door, and then there's a little stairwell, and there are 4 apartments. Bottom left is apartment A, top left is apartment B, top right is apartment C, bottom right is apartment D.
What is that
in the
cable
little,
box?
The little foyer. Boom. So I lived in apartment D.
Sure.
Okay. 309D Marble Lane. And one person, I think it was in apartment B, was the one that had cable. And then we had a splicer that spliced that bad boy 4 different directions. So all 4 apartments had cable, and, like every 3 months it was your turn to pay the bill. And you got really excited if everybody decided to watch HBO at one time, because then it would actually come in because we, whatever. But this is the same version of that in 2023. Whether it be Netflix, Peacock, any of these streaming services, HBO Max. I mean, you almost wonder, like, who's the one that's subscribing to it? I'm not promoting this, but it's rampant, right? And Netflix, I think what happened to Netflix, Jimmy, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think for a lot of people, Netflix was a huge, no business out there probably benefited more during COVID than Netflix. But at the same time, that was probably the time when the password sharing went rampant, right? Because people are like, Now, here's a good trivia question for you. What was I may be wrong in this, but my recollection, what was the show during COVID?
Tiger King.
Bingo.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone watched that, right, at the beginning of COVID.
Yep.
So that probably was, 20 years from now when they do a 30 for 30 type thing about it, about Netflix, whatever, or they do, wait for it, a Netflix documentary. That's what one of the things it's going to talk about, how that spread it like wildfire. But then once they got to the point where they're like, okay, well, you've been milking it for free off your uncle. Now we're going to make you pay for it. I think there are a lot of people that after they're like, oh, you know what? I got to do that in like a couple of weeks here. And then after a couple of weeks, they're like, I don't think I missed it as much as I thought I would.
Yeah. That's kind of what happened for me. And also, I'm more in the realm of if there's like a really cool exclusive that I just absolutely have to see, I'll sign up for a month and then cancel it.
Well,
and then they're not.
I think that happens a lot,
Yeah,
right?
That happens for everybody. What we would do is, let's say I have Max and my brother-in-law has Netflix. Well, he can use the Max login. I can use Netflix login. It all kind of evens out because the pricing platforms are about the same.
If you were to do like the final four of the streaming services, like what are the big four?
Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max, and then
Paramount?
You can have an argument for either Paramount Plus or Peacock or I guess Hulu if you wanted, but that gets closer to the TV area. But I'd say one of those four. So
does Paramount, so you can't get Peacock programming on Paramount, right?
Correct.
Because there was one the other day I was looking and there was something that was on Paramount that surprised me because I'm like, well, it's not an NBC. Oh, Amazing Race is available on Paramount.
Because
but I thought
it's under the CBS umbrella.
I thought Paramount was NBC, though.
Mm-mm. No. Peacock, obviously, as you know, but the listeners
NBC,
might not know,
right.
is tied to the NBC logo because that's what
of
it is,
course,
Peacock.
Yeah. But I thought Peacock was just the sports division.
So you can get movies because I think NBC Universal, any Universal movies you can get on Peacock,
Gotcha. Okay.
and then any Paramount Picture movies plus CBS programming like the NFL, like UEFA Champions League, you can get on Paramount Plus.
By the way, Eddie, we have a new configuration here, and because of the way it's set up, I can't see you. I can only see when you're moving your microphone.
Okay.
So I don't know if that means you're wanting to say something or what, because I can't see you. All I can see is the screen.
No, I'm just trying to figure out, the right mic situation where I feel most comfortable. New studio, got to get comfortable.
Do you want to raise the seat a little bit?
No.
Let me see if I can lower this screen here.
Don't break it.
I know. I don't want to break anything. So Indiana last night with the win. Next up is going to be Auburn. Again, Jeff Rabjohns going to join us later. We now know the Pacers, Jimmy, going to play the Milwaukee Bucks in Vegas, right?
Yeah, it's basically I guess not full-scale revenge tour since the Pacers were able to beat the Bucks in that classic thriller last month. But when you look at what the Pacers' road is to get to a NBA Cup final in the inaugural NBA Cup.
Is that what it's called, the NBA Cup? I thought it was just called the
Well, it's the in-season tournament, but the NBA Cup's what's on the line, and I think that should be more embraced.
That's the thing that's in the middle of the floor, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. The NBA Cup up for grabs, and you look at what the Pacers have to go through, it's the top two teams in the Eastern Conference. They've already knocked out one. So you got to go to a neutral site now, take on Milwaukee, and then if you take care of business there tomorrow at 5 o'clock, and you can hear that right here on the Pacers radio network here on The Fan. Eddie, coverage starts at 4:30. 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. If you're able to get a win there, then all of a sudden you're into Saturday's final, where you'd be looking at one of, I don't have the bracket in front of me. Eddie, do you happen to know who's left on the western side?
It is the Lakers and the Pelicans.
There you go. New Orleans and
a very controversial ending to the Phoenix-LA game last night. Don't know if you saw that or not.
I will be honest, I went to bed.
One possession game, loose ball. Nobody has possession. Officials grant the Lakers a timeout. When there was clearly no possession of the basketball. Lakers retained possession, and they were able to close out and win the game.
All right, then.
LeBron had what last night? He had a big game, right?
He had like 31, I want to say.
I mean, for 38 years old, he's averaging 24.4 a game.
Oh, it's nuts. It's nuts.
For 38 years old, it's like, people keep waiting for him to fall off a cliff. And, yeah, sure, he may not be like the dominant go-to score every possession guy, but it's still pretty darn impressive, is it not?
Yeah, even if he is, and you can have that debate, I would still say in most crunch time late game situations, he is your number one that's either going to facilitate or take that shot. But whether you want to say, it's Anthony Davis or whoever, the fact that he is still at worst the number two scoring option on a team that views itself in the championship conversation is mind-boggling at his age.
The thing that's funny about the Final Four of the NBA in-season tournament, what are the smallest markets in the NBA?
Smallest markets? I always get confused on this conversation because I had thought for a long time that, like, by definition of the way the league works, like a couple years ago before LeBron and Bosh and Wade, I thought Miami was considered in that conversation, but then I was told, well, not really, because I would say San Antonio, right? They're
what has always amused me,
because people call them a small market team.
What's
right?
always amused me is like in football.
Sure.
When people are like, Miami's a small market team. I'm like, small? What are you talking about? Like, is anything, do people consider anything other than New York and Los Angeles to be small market?
I feel like, yeah, if you're not those two, it's over.
I mean, people don't realize Houston's a good one, okay? Houston is literally like the fourth largest metropolitan area in the United States. It's the seventh largest television market, okay? The biggest TV market is New York. Second is Los Angeles. But in terms of the NBA, obviously, any league, you want bigger markets because it means more television eyeballs just because you get that hometown grouping, right?
Oklahoma City, Utah.
Okay, Oklahoma, you're missing a big one. I mean, or in this case, a small one, right? Looking at the television markets in the United States of America, you had mentioned Oklahoma City, that is 46th. Oklahoma City is 46th. Believe it or not, Memphis, 52. New Orleans.
I said the Pelicans, didn't I?
New Orleans is 50. You said San Antonio, right? Salt Lake City, by the way, 29.
Where's Charlotte on that list?
Charlotte is Indianapolis, by the way, in television market. Now, this is not metropolitan area ranking. That's different.
Correct.
Charlotte's market 21. Indianapolis is market 25. Salt Lake is market 29. And Milwaukee is market 38. So you've got market 38, market 50, market 25, and then market number 1. But I saw a tweet last night from a national writer that said, look, people need to wake up. Just because teams are smaller market doesn't mean that they aren't as exciting. And they said, like, and I can't remember what writer it was, I apologize, but it was a national NBA writer. Like, look, there are a few teams in the league right now more exciting than the Indiana Pacers. And that's true, because what do people like? If you're a fan of the Pacers, their lack of defense drives you crazy. If you're just a fan of the NBA and you're flipping channels, hell, let's go.
They're must-watch every night.
Right.
You're not going to find a better ticket in terms of
what's
offensive
the
display.
over-under going to be for the the Indiana-Milwaukee game? I mean, what's the over-under set at right now? It's got to be, I'm going to put the over-under in that game at 231.
Oh, man.
And that's low, right?
I'd be rich.
Okay, so.
I would be rich.
No, okay, so, well, I'm going a little concerned. I'll say 245. How's that?
You're still not even close.
250.
Getting warmer.
260.
Too high.
251, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
254.5.
Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
254.5 for, I mean, why would you not want, like, again, painstaking for basketball traditionalists in Indiana. Well, I only watch college because they run nothing but the fork, man to man. And, I mean, they're basketball traditionalists. I get it. I get it.
Here's my one, I try to preach this to people all the time. I know there's more traditionalism in college basketball, but if you like, which I feel like a lot of Indiana people do, growing up with a basketball court in your driveway or basketball hoop in your driveway and layups and shooting threes, when you see threes taken in college, I don't care if it's the NCAA tournament. I don't care if it's a Thursday night in the MAC. You never know if that shot's going in. Doesn't matter if the guy's wide open.
Right.
If you see an NBA player, almost any NBA player
question.
Get a wide open look from three, it's in.
You are dead on. It is amazing how I watched Obi Toppin. I mean, I think we know that Obi Toppin's a good shooter, right?
Sure.
But Obi Toppin's a 6'10" guy that played I mean, Jimmy, I'm 6'4", okay? From the time that I was playing basketball, I was the tallest kid on my team every time, and I played center until I got to high school, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, you're now the sixth tallest, and I've got to learn to play outside, whatever. A guy like Obi Toppin has probably played, every coach he's had growing up probably had him down low, and I watched him shooting three-pointers during halftime, coming out of the halftime on Monday night, and he hit like 11 in a row, just like shooting, right? NBA three-pointers. And I know that he shoots them in the course of the game, but that's like your 7th three-point option on the Pacers roster. To your point, everybody can hit, and as I've said before, you go to any NBA game, every player on the floor, as you're watching that game, and you're seeing some guy with the basketball in his hand that averages 8.5 points a game for the New Orleans Pelicans and 18 minutes a game. As he's dribbling, there are two guys in a bar in Baton Rouge talking about how it's the greatest high school player they've ever seen.
Yeah.
Romeo Langford is a legend here that had fat guys in sweatpants wrapped around high school gyms in 12-degree weather waiting for his autograph when he was 17, and that guy now is lobbing up passes for like the Provo Stars in the G League, right?
Yep.
And he's one of the greatest high school players in Indiana history. No question about it. Little Colts action to talk about as well as they get set for the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll get into that. And then coming up on the program, we're going to talk Luke Easterling, little NFL chat coming up at 1 o'clock. Jeff Rabjohns, 2 o'clock. Loaded on a Wednesday here. Query Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
Colts football.
Folks, Your award for most cringeworthy, embarrassing stare at the floor. Gosh, I can't believe at one time it looked cool videos of all time. Separate Ways by Journey. It's not in the Billy Squier Rock Me Tonight category, but it's way up there. In terms of bands, it may be number one. Hey, let's just get a bunch of guys in front of a green screen and have them act like they're playing instruments, and then suddenly the instruments appear. That'll be awesome and cool. And for like 2 weeks it was in 1983 or 4 or whatever. Then you look at it now and you're like, yeah, no bueno. Big no bueno. We have a new name for Wednesdays when it comes to the Colts, right, Jimmy?
We do indeed.
And that would be?
I think it's Walkthrough Wednesday.
That is correct. Walkthrough Wednesday, because that's what they're doing now towards the end of the season. It's kind of walkthroughs. So not necessarily any hard-hitting activity at West 56, at least not anticipated. But I guess the question becomes, Jimmy, or the statement, it doesn't seem like they really came, Jacksonville, we haven't even talked about this. Good news, bad news for the Jacksonville Jaguars, which means good news, bad news, I guess, for the rest of the NFL and specifically the AFC South. The good news for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'm not going to say bad news for the rest of the league, because you're not hoping for a player to be hurt, don't get me wrong. But the good news for the Jaguars, as we talked about yesterday, Trevor Lawrence, it does appear that is just an ankle sprain, which is incredible because it looked horrific when it happened. Bad news for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Christian Kirk, who is their leading receiver to this point. Calvin Ridley, I think, has more catches, but in yardage, Christian Kirk is the leading receiver, and is a guy that, through Trevor Lawrence's kind of acclimation into the NFL, has been a safety net kind of guy for Trevor Lawrence, out for the year. And that's a significant blow for them, because especially if Lawrence is not able to go for a couple of weeks, you definitely need kind of a safety net type receiver. I say out for the year. If they were to make the Super Bowl and maybe the AFC title, he could return. But he has a groin injury that is going to require surgery. I don't know about you guys, but what would be the worst? What would be the worst injury to have? Like the one that just when you hear it, you're like, eesh. I mean, there was a guy a couple of years ago in soccer that had a ruptured testicle.
Yeah, I feel like anything below the belt or above the knees, Jake, is probably going to get into
that happened in baseball.
Was it baseball? Is that where it was?
Mm-hmm, Mitch Haniger, I believe. It was a Seattle Mariner.
Yeah, here's the thing. If that was the injury that I had, I would ask for two things. One would be like a 6-week sedative, and then the other would be to make up some sort of a knee injury that I suffered, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
It's the long-term grabbing your knee when you fall to the ground, even though you didn't hurt your knee. Yes, correct.
Yes,
sure.
That's correct. Followed by the weird stomach ache, and then the feeling that you're going to have to sneeze.
Yep.
Except for that for that poor fella, it went on for like 3 days. Like, good night. No thank you, right?
Yes.
But a groin injury feels like that would also just be, I don't know, man, like the first step in the morning, that would be a tough one to just have to sit and recover from, because I'm assuming there can't be a lot of movement there. But Christian Kirk being out is big. But, Jimmy, on the Colts side of things, the one guy I think that obviously, you get Grover Stewart back, which is going to be big for them, particularly against the run. And when you're having Stewart back, the magnitude of that is probably accentuated by the fact that you are getting ready to see down the home stretch for the Colts. How many week 1 starters are they going to face at quarterback?
Did Ritter start, Eddie?
He did.
So 2, because Stroud started as well. So 2. 2 of the 2 other 5 games, 2 will have week 1 starters.
And now Stroud, not the case. Desmond Ritter, though, still a guy that's kind of learning how to be a starter, right?
Correct.
You know what I mean? And when you have a young or inexperienced, either one, quarterback, what are you incredibly reliant upon?
The running game.
Which is big to have Grover Stewart back, because that's, that's the one thing that we saw during his absence. There obviously was, you saw how valuable he is in stopping the run. Juju Brents is the other guy that, did you ever think at the beginning of the year, in particular when he was missing time in camp, that we would be sitting here by the time that now I would say
that conversation changes once you get to like week 3, right? If you fast forward to about week 3 or week before he got hurt, it's like, wow, this rookie can really play
for sure.
Maybe I would have bought in.
He's a big guy. You know what I mean? Like he's
correct. But you're right about training camp. No, I would have been like, that really?
Right. I mean, he missed camp time, and you're like, come on. I mean, this guy's probably never going to play this year. And then he played, and not only is he plays bigger than he is.
Yeah.
He plays wider than he is, if that makes sense, Juju Brents. And I would have said in camp, Jimmy, when we were talking about the impact of Juju Brents, to use a barometer of the calendar, I could have said, like, hey, do you think Juju Brents will still be an integral part of the Colts conversation by the time that, like, the Monument Circle, the Christmas tree lights are up? But I more likely would have said, which happens first, the Monument construction and repair and renovation is done, or Juju Brents is like an integral part? Well, that hasn't changed at all.
No.
The Monument thing... The Monument, in terms of the renovation, it's Bob Sanders, right? Like the timeline keeps getting changed, and then after a while, you even forget about it.
Yeah,
it's like out of sight, out of mind. There's still like 9 guys sitting around. If you haven't been downtown, folks, the north side of the Monument Circle looks the same. Actually, it looks and it's kind of a neat thing they're doing. They've turned the clock back. It looks just like Christmas 1902, right, when they were building the monument.
It's actually what they were going for, believe it or not.
It's a retro look,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, go back to Grover Stewart for just a second, because Juju Brents, his return, whenever that happens, is going to be big for this defense, because you look at some of the names they're going to be going against over the next couple of weeks: George Pickens, Drake London, Devontae Adams, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, but specifically looking at running backs for just a second over these next couple of weeks, and why having Grover Stewart back and shoring up this Colts run defense. Joe Mixon, Jaylen Warren, Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, Devin Singletary, Dameon Pierce. These are all backs that you're going to face down the stretch. And that's not to say that just a running back, Bijan Robinson, that's not to say that just a running back can totally dictate a game and it's a guaranteed loss because his backs are out there, because those backs are on some pretty bad teams. But the ability to potentially take away, or at least make it more difficult on a piece of each one of these teams that have been very effective in their last couple of weeks and throughout their totality of those players' careers, is magnified by the fact that backup quarterbacks is the name of the game right now, the Colts' rest of the schedule. And you've seen these teams really shift and lean on, at times, star running backs in this league. So, yeah, anytime you're able to add back a piece that can help defensively in the running game as well as Grover Stewart does, you're going to take that, because I don't want to be too cliche, Jake, but it is every game the rest of the way, and we've been saying this for the last 2 weeks, is a playoff game for the Colts for 2 reasons. 1, because you need to win to be able to get in. And 2, you're going up against teams, for the most part, except for 1, that are also still vying or think they're vying for a playoff spot. So any edge you can get back, whether it's Juju Brents in the passing game with some incredible weapons, even with backup quarterbacks playing, whether it's Grover Stewart with some talented running backs, even with a backup quarterback under center, that's a plus and an advantage for the Colts, kind of like if you're getting a player back from injury, even though you were quiet at a trade deadline, right? They use that all the time in baseball. Well, we didn't make a move at the deadline, but we got so-and-so back, and that kind of feels like we made a move at the deadline, right? Like, that's basically where the Colts are from a mentality standpoint in terms of getting weapons back. They're going to help you in this stretch run.
Jimmy, I mean this to take nothing away from the Colts, because they've won the games they need to win, right? And the Tennessee win was an impressive win because you kind of had to dig down deep to get it. And even though Will Levis is a rookie, like, I thought he looked pretty competent. I mean, it wasn't like you were out there against a guy that, you felt, if you were a Tennessee fan going into the overtime, it wasn't like you thought to yourself, how are we even going to possibly move the ball? He's competent, right?
Yeah.
But, let's face it, at least 2 of those 4 teams that they beat in this 4-game stretch are not necessarily world beaters, but you have to win. You have to win the games that you're supposed to win, and they've done that, right?
That conversation is going to be very big this offseason when looking at what this team did. Because
Correct.
right now, I'm willing to turn a blind eye to it, but I feel the same way you do. Look at who they played.
You can't rely on that to think that you don't need to have areas of improvement.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You can't get too comfortable by it, but you build off of it. It's great for this team that they are playing meaningful games in December, because what did we talk? We talked to Alec Pierce yesterday, right? And Alec Pierce, when he talked about the end of the year last year, what did he say? He said, look, it was tough because we're playing for nothing. And he's like, I mean, don't get me wrong, we wanted to win, but like we're just playing out the schedule. And he's like, and it was really hard. Well, for young guys now, for Juju Brents, for young player Anthony Richardson, now as rookies, they are getting immediate taste of the NFL when you got to play and when the games matter. And so that in that area, it's a huge strong suit. And they may well, I mean, I think they're going to the playoffs. They may win the division. They may win a playoff game. Who knows?
Pierce gave me a perspective I've never thought of before, because I've never been in that headspace as an athlete. And for me, the way I view it as for a rookie, well, like I almost look at it at times like robotics, which is unfair because they're human beings. But the way I look at it is, well, your season's done in terms of going to the playoffs, but this is a great opportunity for you to grow still as a player. And not to say that he didn't do that, but even when I try to be conscious of the mental aspect of the game, for him to be feeling that of like, hey, I've been a winner my whole life, and yes, I'm still working out there and giving 100%, but it's taken a toll somewhat when you're not playing for something. That's a hard aspect initially for me to have my eyes open to, because you think, oh, well, it's their job. Like, naturally, they're going to want to get better, which he did. But the thought that that aspect of not playing for anything can impact young players is something that I'm sure I've thought of in passing, but never really thought of like that. So to get that genuine perspective from him and knowing that he still did focus on getting better, but that was a hurdle that guys have to overcome, it's just a very unique perspective that often gets overlooked, because you think of it in terms of like their robots, like, okay, that objective's done, go work on this objective. Well, it's harder than that when you've been used to all this team success and always being in games and always playing football in meaningful situations. And, oh, by the way, 6 extra games on your schedule, like he pointed out, versus being done on January 1st.
But it does feel, when you look at it, like one of those years where everything's kind of fallen into place for them.
Yeah.
Right? And you got to take advantage of that. You got to take advantage of it, and you got to count the blessings of it, right? And say, look, Shane Steichen so far, I think for the most part, Jimmy, has pushed every right button. And one of those buttons that he's pushing is deciding towards the end of the year here that on Wednesdays, for example, you kind of ease into the week, as opposed to, what did Alec Pierce say about last year? He's like, look, we were running these practices like as if we were going to the Super Bowl. And I get it. Jeff Saturday was probably trying to send a message. I'm sure he was probably following an order from Jim Irsay of like, come in here and be kind of a drill sergeant type. I don't know that. But, Saturday played in an era where if you won on Sunday, you got Monday, Tuesday off. So, I mean, he knows that side of it. But I could see how Saturday probably thought, look, my job is to come in here and immediately, like, put a footprint on it. And so I'm going to come in and let these guys know it's a different NFL than what they think it is. And you can get away with that probably when your team is 10-2. It's a little more challenging when you're 2-10.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things. But Shane Steichen this year so far has pushed literally every button. Every button. Talk more NFL with Luke from from Athlon Sports, I should say, coming up here in just about 10 minutes. And I've got a favor to ask of everybody. You ready to do a favor, Jimmy?
Always.
Eddie, you ready to help me out with a favor?
Indeed.
Neither one of you guys are obligated, but I do have a favor for Indianapolis. I'll mention it next.
Sundown Gardens and Miss Sims are matching up to $2,000.
Back here on a Wednesday, Jake Query along with Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison. It is Query and Company here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. I had mentioned, and I am very appreciative, not only of the fact that people have lended their ear or ears in this regard, but also for your guys' understanding on allowing me to occasionally mention this because it is really important to me. But it's important to a lot of people in Indianapolis. I had mentioned before that Firefly, most people would know of Firefly as the Children's Bureau. It's on the west side of Indianapolis. It's right off of Dr. Martin Luther King Drive. But what Firefly does is a number of different programs, not only for young parents who are struggling and need counseling, whether it be just for familial situations, addiction, all kinds of different things. All of it with the best intent, with everything in mind towards the family structure for children. And one of the things that Firefly does that is probably its most critical element is provides short-term and then at times even long-term housing for children who are immediately removed in an emergency situation from a dangerous situation. The example I always use is, middle of the night, domestic situation, police are called, they show up, mom and dad are arguing or someone in the family is fighting, it gets violent, and the police remove the children for their own safety, and then in the interim while DCS is figuring out and navigating through that, the Firefly residential facility is where they go, right, and they live, they're able to still go to school, but they get the necessary support during that time. And in that capacity, Firefly every year creates a Christmas wish list for children, and you can adopt a child, sponsor a child. I'm just going to give a small example here, Jimmy, because it does become kind of heartbreaking. I'm reading one child's wish list, okay, and there's a reason I'm mentioning all this. Here's the wish list of this child who was asked, what do you want for Christmas? Well, I'm the oldest of 3. I would like calming strips, clothes, socks, sensory items for the shower, but more importantly, anything for my younger brother and sister, including personal hygiene items for Christmas. So, you can do like a lot of people. So far, they started out with about 1,500 children and families that were in need of Christmas support. Probably around $150 is what you're looking at if you want to be able to get all the items that a child wants. I go a little, buy a couple of extra items, a Nerf football, that kind of thing. But there are 280 children still that are waiting for a sponsor. 280 children that are hoping to get just a simple few items under the Christmas tree to let them know that, in fact, the spirit and the miracle of Christmas does exist. You can go to my Twitter account, @JakeQuery, on social media, JakeQuery, @JakeQuery. My pinned tweet, as it's called, right at the top. I have the link right there. Or, as always, you can text me at 523-9288. That's 523-9288. I will send you the link. You can click on it. It is extremely easy to navigate, and in most cases, right there, you can click on the wish list and the Amazon wish right there and purchase right there. You don't even have to leave the house. Very easy to do. I know it's a bit of a commitment, but we're trying to get every child sponsored. So I'll mention that a couple of times between now and Christmas, but thanks for allowing me to do that. Jimmy, last night, as we talked about, big win for Indiana over Michigan. Colts getting set to take on the Cincinnati Bengals. We just got into that, but there's a lot going on in the NFL. It's the best time of year, right? Because not only are games ramping up a little bit, but also we're getting into that part of the year where it's like basically 7 days a week of football talk, right? Including Saturday and Sunday. And I mean, I could see you're a Chiefs guy. You're over there salivating at it, right?
It's the perfect mesh of near 24/7, what the NFL loves to have all year, but just condensed in rapid fire succession, 7 days a week. Add in bowl season to that, and it's perfect. If you're a football fan, it is absolutely perfect. Plus, if you're like me and you enjoy using the playoff simulator or the playoff machine to figure out scenarios for teams, you're no longer totally insane when you've been doing it since week 10, and now everybody else is finally on board, starting to play out those scenarios over the final 5 weeks of the season.
One of the great holiday traditions, and I know that very few people anymore, like I just mentioned, you can shop like right there at Amazon, right? But, you know, I used to always love like going through, like at Christmas time, a week before Christmas, and you're going through the mall and it's packed and it's chaos, and you pass by, again, these are kind of yesteryear memories, but you pass by the electronics store and they have the TVs that are for sale, and it's literally like 50 people sitting around watching, because that's actually where I saw the Music City Miracle when the Tennessee Titans knocked out the Buffalo Bills on, you know, the famous Dyson play on the kick return. I watched that standing with like 50 other people, I think like in front of like an H.H. Gregg at the mall, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, what did I just witness? What did I just witness?
R.I.P. H.H. Gregg.
That's right. Luke Easterling, by the way, Athlon Sports next.
The leaves have fallen. The air
Company in the home stretch of the playoff push for both the Colts and a lot of teams around the AFC. We'll cover a lot of different ground in terms of that playoff race and look at top teams around the whole conference as well as the whole league with our next guest, Luke Easterling. Does a great job covering the NFL at Athlon Sports. You've heard him on these very airways before. Luke, how are you on a Wednesday?
Doing great, guys. It's a nice 61 degrees down here in Tampa, so not bad for December.
Come on, man.
Hey, I gotta use what I got, man. See me in August when we can't go outside because it's too hot.
Well, Luke, thanks for joining us. We hope you have a good hot. No, I'm just kidding. No, you're right. Let me ask you this, Luke. Did you grow up in Florida? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, born and raised here. Outside of a few months, I lived in Georgia. A few months, I lived up in northern Kentucky. I played some college ball up there. But most of it all has been down here in the greater Tampa area.
Because look, I've got family in St. Pete, like most people in Indiana have family in Florida somewhere, right? So it's obviously a great area. But I am curious of this before we get talking football, since you brought it up, because all of us could use that sunshine for a weekend just to get that little dose of energy in the wintertime. So advantage Tampa for sure. But I am curious of this, and I guess you wouldn't know any different. But is it weird to have, for a 36-hour window, is it weird to have Christmas in shorts and a T-shirt?
I'm not going to lie. I hate it. I understand that I speak out of ignorance, having only experienced winter. Like I said, I lived in northeast Kentucky, and so it snowed a few times that winter and got into the teens and 20s and had a snowball fight here and there. But I don't know what it's like to live through a real winter every year and have to deal with that. But I've been here for so long that I really do get tired of the 87-degree Christmas mornings. It's just it kills some of the vibe, man. I'd love to have a white Christmas. I'd love to have it's just, I don't know. I hate it. I hate that it's always hot on Christmas.
And I respect you saying that, because I do think that when you live, I've lived in a cold weather climate my entire life, predominantly in Indianapolis, but I do think that, and I hate winter, Luke. I hate it, not because of the cold, but the lack of sunshine itself. But I think everybody that hates winter still, at least at Christmas time, appreciates the fact that it's truly Christmas. You know what I mean? So I was always curious.
Yeah, I agree. I think they should. Advantage you guys.
Hey, let's get to this in the NFL. I wanted to ask you, kind of generically speaking, to begin, when the NFL season is very cyclical, and you have at times, in October, the team that people are like, holy cow, print the trophy now, engrave it now.
Right.
And obviously there are waves due to injuries and just all kinds of things. Who has been give me maybe the two teams that have been the most consistently top teams so far this season? Is it the obvious, or is there somebody that's look, you don't talk about them, but they have been playing at the same level from basically week one, so advantage them?
Honestly, the team that comes to mind that might not be obvious to, because there's such a logjam there at the top of the AFC, but I feel like that team is Baltimore. I feel like if I was going to go with consistency with the way they've performed against some of the better teams they play, go look at what Lamar Jackson did to that fully healthy Cleveland defense earlier in the season. Go look at what they did to Detroit. I think the week after Detroit put it on somebody else. I think, to watch a team like Detroit do what they did to start the season against Kansas City and play really well, and then Baltimore to just roll in there and just smack them around. And obviously being healthy helps with some of that. But they've had a few injuries as well. The fact that offense has continued to grow, it's continuing to put up points despite the fact that Ronnie Stanley, their top tackle, has been out for a bit. Obviously, they don't have Mark Andrews right now. That's the team that I think, and again, the way they can win games, that the passing game has finally been opened up a little bit under Todd Monken, the new OC, and they still have the ground game to get it done. Gus Edwards and now Keaton Mitchell, the rookie undrafted free agent, they've got kind of a thunder and lightning backfield now to go along with Lamar Jackson. I feel like the fact that they can beat anybody any way they want to beat them, and especially because they can run the ball so well, this is the time of year you've got to be able to win on the ground and win with defense. They're the team that I think I would have the most confidence in being able to go through a playoff gauntlet and consistently win in any type of way.
Luke Easterling of Athlon Sports is our guest. Luke, when you look at the bottom half of the playoff teams or hopeful playoff teams in the AFC, it's a It's a quarterback slaughterhouse, effectively, with backup QBs just across the board trying to lead their teams and in some cases right the ship for a time or two until healthier options come back. When you look at this setup, and we'll take Jacksonville out of the equation because it looks like if they stay afloat, they'll get Trevor Lawrence back at some point this year. So let's assume that's the diagnosis. When you look at the rest of the AFC with all these backup quarterbacks in Pittsburgh, here in Indy, in Cleveland, Cincinnati, who has the best chance to make it out alive over these final 5 weeks?
I mean, it's tough. The AFC North is weird. They've got some stars on either side of the ball in certain places, but nobody has, I feel like, the complete package. And I mean, I feel like if you look at Indy on the surface, you're like, they should probably, they might have the least amount of talent on paper compared to some of these teams, especially with the other injuries they're dealing with Jonathan Taylor and some others. But I don't know. I feel like there's something to the fact that Indy has already had Gardner Minshew in the building and has been doing this for longer than I think some of these teams that are kind of having to deal with these quarterback injuries and roll with them later in the season. I feel like there's a comfort level with Indy, particularly on offense, that they know that Gardner can get them there, that he's their guy, that he's been the guy for the rest of the season for a while now, ever since they knew Anthony Richardson was going to miss the rest of the year. And I don't know, man. When a team finds a way to win games over and over and over again in ways that they probably shouldn't, that's a team that starts to pique my interest. And I think that applies to Indy. And again, speaking this as a Bucs guy down here in Tampa and watching how they won that game, watching how they won this past week, that's a team that is galvanized. That's a team that kind of knows who they are and has an identity. And that's kind of rare under a first-year head coach, right? It usually takes a lot of time to establish that. Heck, the Bucs still don't have one, I don't think, outside of throw Mike Evans the ball, and Todd Bowles has been here for quite a while. So I don't know, man. I'm not just trying to blow smoke for Colts fans on the airwaves here in Indy, but man, I look at a team that knows who they are, that knows how to play for and around the quarterback they do have, and everybody feels like they're pulling their weight there, and I think that's a dangerous thing to be going in to this stretch when you look at some of those other teams and the fact that they're still trying to figure those things out.
Luke, we could use smoke. It's 35 degrees, man. I mean, come on, right?
Fair enough.
We'll take all you can get. Hey, I like to ask national guys this, which you obviously are, Luke Easterling from Athlon Sports. In terms of perceptions, in terms of like word association, when you think about the Indianapolis Colts in 2023 right now, give me the two franchises that in terms of their competitiveness, in terms of their competency, in terms of their trajectory, give me the two teams in the NFL that you think of on the same bar, on the same plane as Indianapolis.
I mean, I think aspirationally, when are you talking like in general, if Anthony Richardson is included?
No, like right now where they are. For another, like so this season, you'd say, hey, San Fran is on par with San Fran, Philly, and Dallas are like in a grouping together.
Right.
Just in terms of like how, like in other words, the outside perception of the Colts is that they are mirrored by or they are contemporaries of these franchises right now.
I mean, I think you look at those other teams that they're fighting with in the playoffs, right? You've got Pittsburgh and Cleveland in particular, and then Cincinnati to a lesser degree. You got teams that are trying to ride with backup quarterbacks, and they're doing it They're doing it with timely playmaking on third down. They're doing it with creating big plays on defense and playing stingy enough, and they're doing it with great coaching. And I think Pittsburgh has struggled in that situation, obviously on offense in particular, but they've got stability overall in a big picture way from Mike Tomlin being there as long as he has, never having had a losing season. And you look at Cincinnati, they've obviously been to the playoffs. Everybody's dealing with things in a different way. But I feel like they're in that group, right, where they have a chance to do something special, even though everybody would have written them off as soon as, Richardson got hurt and we'll just, wait for next season and punt and, develop some other guys. But that's kind of where I would put them in that group of teams that has some pieces in place to be competitive, but I think have overachieved compared to that perception, especially earlier in the year, that this was just going to be a punt year and move on. They're clearly one of multiple teams in that range that is not taking that lightly, and they're fighting for a playoff spot.
Are Pittsburgh and Cincinnati Like, I feel like Houston has upward trajectory, and that's why they are where they are. And Indianapolis has upward trajectory, and that's why they are where they are. Whereas, like, Cincinnati, for example, is with Indianapolis, but it kind of feels like they're backpedaling a little bit. Maybe I'm selling them short on their weapons outside the quarterback. Pittsburgh also feels like they're on that ice that, like, you can hear it going, and you feel like it's about to crack underneath them. Are those teams solidly, do you think? I mean, I know they are solidly, but you get what I'm saying. Like, are they going to stick around here, or are we going to see one of these teams start to fade?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting in terms of trajectory is Cincinnati feels like they're sliding back because they got so high so quick, right, in recent years. You got to the Super Bowl, and you kept getting back to the ACC title game, and you kept, watching Joe Burrow beat, Patrick Mahomes. So I think part of the equation for them too is that they've already paid their quarterback. They've paid Joe Burrow, so the window time is ticking now. That once you pay that star quarterback, you're not going to have as much money to spread around to these other guys. So, the fact that they have both Chase and Higgins is probably not going to be there if they want to be able to afford anything else next year. So, that receiver room is going to be depleted. That's where I start to think of. I know it feels a little bit different just to talk about this year, but that window for Cincinnati feels a bit more urgent. So I feel like every loss, every injury is exponential for a team like that. Pittsburgh might be the best team in the league. I mean, if you watch them on a weekly basis and then look at their record, and this happened to them a few years ago. Remember when they were like 11-0 and they never looked good? You're like, how does this team keep winning football games over and over and over again? And then they got knocked out of the first round of the playoffs, which wasn't really surprising. But Pittsburgh feels like that to me. They continue to win in spite of themselves somehow. And Sunday's game against Arizona was just a prime example. They lose to the team that had the second worst record in the league at the time, and they do it at home. I mean, that shows you, I think, to speak to your point and to see that they seem to be, receding a bit, whereas a team like Indianapolis, even a team like Houston, like you mentioned, they feel like they're moving forward. That's kind of what I attribute that to.
I feel like we all know the answer is Mike Tomlin and some kind of witchcraft there, but that's all I have in that regard in terms of Pittsburgh being able to do that year over year. Jake brought up Cincinnati, and that brings into the conversation Jake Browning. When you look at what he's done in relief of Burrow, obviously he's not Joe Burrow, but there's weapons still there. Zach Taylor's a good coach. They've been able to still work things offensively. Earlier today, Zach Taylor noted that what he was most impressed with Jake Browning was, of his 5 incompletions, 2 drops, 2 tip balls, and 1 was a throwaway. When you look at that comment and what you've seen out of Browning the last couple of weeks, is that a coach just going to bat for his guy, or is Browning competent enough to keep the Bengals in the playoff conversation and ultimately maybe squeaking in that 7 spot?
No, I think what you saw, particularly Monday night, was a great plan executed by a competent quarterback, and I think they prepared him and got him in situations. Honestly, the most confusing things they did all night was when they stopped letting him throw the ball. They had the terrible interception on a wide receiver pass when he was playing extremely efficiently. That was not the time to try to pull those things out, and I feel like when they did their worst, when they took the ball out of his hands almost. So, I kudos to him for distributing the ball and doing it well. But you saw his confidence grow throughout the game also. Early in the game, he was completing all of his passes, but I think he was like, 7 of 9 for like 35 yards at one point in the first quarter of the first half. And you're like, okay, this is how it's going to be. And then bang, he gets a one-on-one and he chucks it deep and hits, Jamar Chase on that awesome touchdown deep. That showed a building of confidence. We're like, hey, I've found myself a rhythm. I've got a good matchup. I'm going to sling it and start to, and go back and watch his film at Washington. I mean, he's no slouch. He knows what he's doing. I think it just takes a little bit of time to get into that rhythm and be like, no, I can do it at this level. And once he hit that big shot, I think he realized, hey, we've got something here. And I think that shows, again, it was a great plan during the week, I would imagine, that tried to mold everything to his strengths and not ask too much of him. And then once he got in that rhythm through the first, second quarter, finally found the confidence to start taking those bigger shots, and the results speak for themselves. They won that game. He put up big numbers, made some clutch plays when they needed to be made, and made up for those mistakes. When they had a big play or a big mistake like that interception to set them up deep in their own territory, he always brought them back and did enough to win the game.
Luke Easterling is our guest from Athlon Sports. Luke, Shane Steichen, is he in the mix for Coach of the Year?
I mean, he's got to be, right? I mean, a first-year guy that comes in, you lose the quarterback that you guys spent all offseason kind of building everything around, who is not Gardner Minshew in terms of skill set, right? You're not talking about, taking out one guy that can do a certain amount of things and then putting in another guy who can do those same things, just maybe not at that level. These guys are very, very different quarterbacks, and to be able to adjust to that on the fly, to deal with the fact that, again, your star running back is dealing with the contract situation, and then he's dealing with injuries, and you got all these things going on. That the defense has been hit or miss every week, but the fact that he's kept things together through all of that and been able to put a winning product on the field in his first season as a head coach, I absolutely would put him in that conversation.
I'm going to play spoiler here for folks, okay? You've got out like way in advance, so I'll give you some kudos here on the prep work. A mock draft for the April draft. Obviously, a million things can happen, right, Luke?
Right.
But you've got your first one out. I think we know, for all right now at least, everybody knows that the top two guys are going to be the two quarterbacks, Caleb Williams out of USC and then obviously May out of North Carolina. You've got Williams going number one to Chicago. Assuming that is going to be the case, a lot can happen, I realize. But I'm curious your thought on this. Is that because Williams is such a talent that they can't bypass him, or is it because they are indeed ready to turn the page and move on from Justin Fields?
I think, honestly, what that'll come down to is what they do with the coaching staff in the offseason. I think if they bring in a new coaching staff, I mean, history tells us that more often than not, the new coaching staff is going to want to handpick their own franchise quarterback, right? That's the way it is. And part of that will be financial, too, because even if you want Justin Fields to be your guy, you're only really a year away from having to pay him $100+ million in an extension. So you got to think about it from a salary cap perspective as well. And so their options are to, sure, if we want to build around Justin Fields, we stay at number one, we take Marvin Harrison Jr. and give him another star wide receiver, and we continue to build that way. Or we trade down again, because both Caleb Williams and Drake May will cost more for another team to go up and get than Bryce Young would have last year when they got that big haul from the Panthers to go from 1 to 9 for Bryce Young. They'll be able to ask more of that this year. But if none of that matters, if they bring in a new coaching staff who's like, hey, Fields played well down the stretch, but again, that'll benefit them if he does that anyway, because then they'll trade him and get more for him. But a new coaching staff would probably come in. They'd spend all offseason working out both of those quarterbacks, and I just can't see a new coaching staff coming in with the opportunity to choose between Williams and May and not wanting to restart that clock on the rookie contract and start over again with a much cheaper number for your starting quarterback and find the guy that best fits whatever that offense is going to be, as opposed to sticking with Fields, which, again, I'd love to see him get an opportunity elsewhere where he'll finally get a chance to develop.
Doesn't it kind of feel like if Chicago moves on from Fields that he has shown – like I think he's going to kind of benefit, Luke, from the narrative or the thought that the Bears might be as guilty as he in terms of it not really taking off and just not getting the stability around him. And he's shown enough flash that, like a Sam Darnold, he's going to get a chance somewhere else to prove that it may not have been all him. You agree with that?
And I think he should. I think it's been nowhere near all on him. And again, I never played the position at that level, but I played it enough to know what happens in the pocket when you can't trust what's happening in front of you and what's happening around you and what's happening in the headset, right? So I feel like I could go on. I could do a whole segment on how that franchise has failed his development in terms of team building, in terms of coaching, and how that impacts a quarterback's play, both in terms of poor mechanics. When you can't trust the offensive line, your mechanics get sloppy, you start dropping your eyes, you can't trust what's happening around you. That makes you play poorly. And so I would love to see him get a chance outside of Chicago where he'll have a better supporting cast, fewer expectations, because he has, he was a high first-round pick in a franchise and city that hasn't had a franchise quarterback in a long, long time. I would love to see him get a chance with less pressure, with more resources around him, and then people will see that I don't think it was really him at all.
NFL writer for Athlon Sports, Luke Easterling, is our guest. Luke, when you look at the NFC, is it a two-horse race between Philadelphia and San Francisco, or should we really be considering the idea that Detroit or Dallas could represent the conference in February?
No, I definitely think that those four teams, maybe not equal footing, but it's a 60-minute league. It's a 60-minute game. and all you have to do is play the right 60 minutes at the right moment. And again, I always bring this back to the Bucs because it's what I'm experiencing down here. But go back and look at their Super Bowl run with Tom Brady. They went in as an 11-5 team on a hot streak and had to go on the road in Washington, had to go on the road in New Orleans against Drew Brees, had to go on the road against Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay before they got to Green Bay, or before they got to the Super Bowl and demolished Kansas City. You just play right at the right time, and any of those teams have the talent, have the quality, have the coaching. I feel like that if you get them on the right or wrong day, they'll make you pay for it. I mean, go back and look last week. We wouldn't necessarily consider San Francisco to be that much better than Philly, but they did that on the field because they played the better 60 minutes. So I feel like there have been moments for each of these teams this season where they've looked like the best team in the NFC. And when you can say that, I think you've got to consider the fact that they should all be in that conversation.
Luke, other than the mock draft, which you just put out, tell me what else you got upcoming here in terms of your NFL coverage at athlonsports.com.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, obviously it's draft season for most of the league. If you look ahead, we've got a ton of scouting reports on Athlon Sports. We got over 100 already on some of the top prospects. So we're already knee to waist deep in getting you acquainted with some of the top prospects in the draft class. Obviously, we got bowl season coming up, so we'll be all over that, both from a college football perspective and then looking ahead in terms of scouting those guys for the next level. We'll have everything for the college football playoff as well. So whether you're looking at it from a team perspective, looking at it from a player perspective, you're following your college team and you want to see where those guys are going, or you want to see what your team needs in the next draft, go to athlonsports.com. And I also run the draft site over at si.com, Sports Illustrated. So if you go to si.com/NFL/draft, you can find all my draft stuff there as well.
He's a member of the Pro Football Writers Association of America, as well as the football guy over at Athlon Sports, Luke Easterling. Nice enough to take some time with us. Luke, enjoy the final weeks of the regular season, and I hope we're talking to you into January.
Hey, absolutely, guys. Enjoy it, and happy holidays to you.
You too.
All right, same to you. Interesting stuff there. In talking also about, the NFL is just such a 12-month calendar, obviously. Already looking towards the draft. He mentioned college football in some of the bowl games. Jimmy, we haven't really talked about it in terms of Notre Dame's, because I think you were gone. You were on jury duty, I think, when Notre Dame's bowl game maybe was announced. And I can't even recall which one that they were slotted. But I'm curious from your standpoint, because this is kind of where we're going with college football now. Things have changed a lot. And I was talking about how the transfer portal, I don't have a problem with it. I'm all for it. Guys are going to have a chance to make a lot of money, and that's what it's all about. I get it. I mean, it's America, right? But I do think that some fans eventually are going to get turned off by it, especially,
By which, I'm sorry, the expansion or by the bowl season as a whole?
The transfer portal affecting the bowl season.
Sure.
Because the bowl season to me in college football is interesting because it's all relative. It depends on what your expectation of your team was going in, obviously. Like for Notre Dame. So Notre Dame was slotted with which bowl?
Going to the Sun Bowl.
Okay. See, you say that like you're rolling your eyes.
I don't care. I'll watch it, but I don't. It's an extra game, and you get to raise a trophy, and the players have a fun time because they get stuff, I'm pretty sure, at these events too, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's a fun time for them. Happy for them. It's irrelevant.
It's no Mayo Bowl.
It's no Mayo Bowl also.
Don't over them.
No, let's not. I just ate, okay? I mean, let's be real here.
Did you just eat mayonnaise? Is that why?
No, what's that?
You just eat some mayonnaise? Is that why you don't want to envision it again, or what?
Do I look to you like a guy that I mean, do I look like I'm a glutton for punishment? Mayonnaise is the most disgusting. Like, what is mayonnaise exactly? What is it? Egg whites whipped up with like olive oil mixed in or something?
I think delightful is the word you're looking for, I believe.
Horrible. Like, you can tell the easiest way to determine whether somebody's either a sociopath or economically struggling is based on the amount of mayonnaise that is reliant for their sandwich, right? I mean, let's just be real here. You know what I mean? Are you in a third world country? I don't know. What did they serve for lunch? 2 pieces of bread and mayonnaise? You're in a third world country. Or Arkansas. You know what I mean? Like, it's just how it is, right?
Oil, egg yolk, and acid with either.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Sure, right? What are we talking about here?
And acid such as vinegar or lemon juice.
You needed that last part in there. Just leaving it as
I know.
antacid
I
was
hate
tough.
that. I had to do that
I'll
on
tell you
purpose.
this much. The only way you'd get me to eat mayonnaise is if beforehand I eat acid. I mean, I can tell you that right now. No question.
A little bit on a tenderloin,
But no.
Delicious.
Okay, so back to,
Agreed.
I mean, Cheez-Its, like I can go for that, right, in a bowl game.
I wanted the Pop-Tart Bowl, man.
The Tostitos.
Yeah, who got to the
I don't
Pop-Tart
know.
Bowl? Do we know?
I don't. I can look it up real quick. I don't know who's in the Pop-Tart Bowl.
I thought it was an actual half-decent matchup, if I recall correctly.
Well, I mean, anytime that you mix, frosting with cherry, I mean, yeah, that's an awesome matchup,
NC
right?
State and Kansas State.
Okay. So, like, Kansas State probably is fairly happy going to the Pop-Tart Bowl, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if Clemson would be disappointed going to the Pop-Tart Bowl.
Correct.
Clemson's going to the Gator Bowl, and it's like, you're going to go to Jacksonville and go see Clemson play? I asked my buddy Tony, you're going to go to the game? Well, I don't know. The kid's got this going on. Whereas Indiana goes to the Gator Bowl, and it's like, oh, my gosh,
It's
shut
the
down
Super
the state,
Bowl.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
It's all relative.
Correct. Where are your expectations versus what you're doing on the field realistically?
But the other hard thing, I think, for a lot of people to adapt to, understandably, is the fact that now with bowl games, and I like the bowls because it just gives you something to watch.
Sure.
There's always something on in the background. It's kind of fun.
I want to clarify that part of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Love that aspect of it, where we can just sit here and talk and then flip on the TV and, hey, oh, by the way, I don't want to use Duke's Mayo again, but I'm sorry, Jake.
But in terms of the fanaticism for it,
yeah,
I think it's becoming harder for people because now as soon as the regular season ends, it's not bowl season, it's portal season. Right?
Yeah.
And so
here's my coping mechanism for that. If you're a fan, we're like, to your point, well, so-and-so is not playing in this bowl game because they just entered the transfer portal. I don't view it as that much different as a player declaring for the draft.
No, I get it.
That's how I cope
I'm not
with
poo-pooing the players for
No,
it.
I know.
I'm just saying it takes the wind out of the sails of, for example, Florida State and Georgia, okay? Here are two teams that had a week ago both thought they were going to be playing for a national championship. Now they're playing in a bowl game. How many? And people are going to judge Florida State based on the result of that game with Georgia. But how many players for Georgia or Florida State are even playing in the game to give you a true barometer?
Yeah.
Because how many of them are like, I'm just not going to play in it? You know what I mean?
This is why, and maybe it's my optimism that gets in the way here, but this is why I can't wait for next year when it expands to 12, because it's a larger sample size of the body of work of the top of the sport. I think it's better in terms of engagement and less players entering the transfer portal, or less players, at least at the top of the sport on any given year, not playing in the games, because now you still have a shot at a national championship. And on top of that, the biggest worry prior to expansion was during Bama's dynastic run of it's Bama every year, and then they also ran, right? That's it. I know Bama's back in it this year, but it wasn't a surefire thing. NIL,
to say the least,
and the transfer portal and everything else has leveled out some of that. Has it made it perfect for smaller schools? No. But if you're a program with the resources and are a undefeated season type team, the expansion field, I think, overall betters the product, because now not only are you giving like free tickets to this thing for these teams that are just there for a second and then they're bounced out, you're giving more teams an opportunity for a bite at the apple and to raise a national championship because of college athletics becoming a more level playing field than just one dominant top dog.
I did see, by the way, that apparently in Florida, the Florida State legislature is saving $1 million for a lawsuit against the college football committee to get Florida State into the playoffs. Which, isn't this the same group that hates participation trophies? Isn't that like the exact definition of, we're just going to include everybody? I mean, I thought Florida State should have gotten in, but come on. I mean, it is what it is, right? Indiana last night, big win over Michigan, and it happened with a couple of players making key contributions that you might not have thought about going into the game. We'll explain next.
Don't you love fall in Indy? But I hate the
Indiana last night, 3-point win in Michigan. I think anytime you win at Michigan, the Wolverines at 4-4. I don't know that we really know yet. Indiana off to a 2-0 start in the Big Ten, and you'll obviously take that. I thought it was kind of funny, Jimmy, seeing people kind of nitpick Indiana, and I'm like, who did I see? Some national commentator pointed out, like, Indiana can't shoot the ball, and they're not going to be able to win games with that and whatever. And it's like, well, they are 7-1. Now, they've got some big tests coming up. I don't know. Auburn is one that you saw, and you're like, okay, that's going to be a big test for them. Well, Auburn's not off to a great start either.
No.
So I think a lot of teams are still feeling themselves out. But for Indiana to go on the road, get a win in the Big Ten, they beat in Maryland also, their opening Big Ten win, probably a little down. But it all beats the alternative, and here they are, 2-0 in the conference, off to a good start. Now you go to some non-Big Ten games. But I think, Jimmy, the thing that was encouraging, if you're an Indiana fan, about last night was the fact that there were players. You know that Kel'el Ware is going to be a key player for them this year. If you are Indiana, what you're paying attention to is making sure that Kel'el Ware is totally dialed in and giving nonstop focus, if you will. And so far, he's done that. And Oregon, Dana Altman basically let Kel'el Ware walk because he was unhappy with Kel'el Ware's investment. And look, I think Dana Altman's a hell of a coach. And by all account, I would trust his judgment in that regard, if you will. So when he comes to Indiana, your warning that comes with it, your disclaimer that comes with the product is simply the point of, okay, is he going to play hard all the time? So far he has, and he's been a great player. And you saw last night, in the last minute of that game, why he was worth the flyer. He's uniquely athletic as Kel'el Ware. He's obviously a big player who was able to make a really impressive move to put them in the lead, and then seals it by guarding the inbound passer and making an unbelievably not only athletic but space-occupying play in stealing the inbound and sealing the game for Indiana. But, Jimmy, that came after there were other players on the floor that, for example, your group text to buddies were like, hey, I guess we can go ahead and cancel the alert and the search because we now know that this guy's out there on the floor, right?
When CJ Gunn going to hit a jump shot? That was the joke, right? Because as you mentioned, he was brought in here like that was what the hope was he would be able to develop into, is a nice shooter, among other things, for Indiana. And he hits 2 of them last night. He has a season high, might have even been a career high for him, in 8 points. And he was great in spots. Gabe Cupps defensively was phenomenal all night long, getting the start and replacing Xavier Johnson, who's still out with an injury. And when you look at IU from where do they go from here, and let's stick with Kel'el Ware for just a second, he's passing every test that's asked of him, whether it's offensively or defensively, to this point. Don't want to overlook Auburn, but the 2 dates that I have circled, 3 dates really, is IU Kansas on the 15th, and then the 2 matchups against Purdue. Hunter Dickinson and Zach Edey are 2 of the best big men in college basketball. And if you're going to look at a player, and I feel like kind of backhandedly and wrongly, even though I have great enjoyment and like Dana Altman, I think he's a heck of a coach, if you're going to say it's a work ethic thing or he's not totally locked in, well, that's 2 matchups where if you're not locked in, Indiana's not winning those ball games. Like, they need Kel'el Ware to be just as good, in fact, better than he was, and he was great last night when they play Kansas and the matchups against Purdue. But to this point, it's flying colors, and I really enjoy what I'm seeing. I think that sometimes it is as simple as a change of scenery, a change of system, a change of fit. That is the good aspects of the transfer portal, where it should lead to positive outcomes in theory for the player as long as they're willing to work, and Ware's been willing to do that.
If you were going to do a change of scenery, where would you go?
Miami.
Okay. You got the jack for it? You got a Lambo? Miami would be cool, though, right?
Yeah.
No, what's the noise here?
It's the bat phone.
No, what are we doing? That's not my phone, right?
It's not your phone. It's
this phone
the
over
receiver
here.
in here.
For some reason, the
on?
ringer just randomly got turned on.
What are we doing, Eddie? What are we doing over here? Are they telling us to leave?
Yeah.
We're in a new studio, by the way, and what's going on?
The ringer somehow just randomly turned on, so I'm.
Is this place? Do
turning
we
it
have a
off.
poltergeist in here?
Oh, I hope so.
They're
I would love a studio ghost.
So, for those that are unfamiliar, by the way, and I only mention it because it's irrelevant to our listening audience, but I guess right there it becomes relevant. We have moved studios within the same building here on Monument Circle, but we've just moved down on the same floor as our friends at WIBC. And
shout out if we may, by the way,
you know what?
to everybody involved.
I'll tell you what it is.
This has been a very smooth transition across the board.
but here's what it is.
Yes.
I didn't realize this.
Okay.
We're now on the same floor as our friends at IBC, right?
That's correct.
I just made a snarky comment against the Florida State Legislature led by Ron DeSantis. They can hear me now, right? Because we're on the same floor as our friends on the fourth floor at IBC, and they're sending over some sort of a warning here of calm it down, right? Keep it cool.
It could be some friendly office hijinks. Who's to say?
That's right. Listen, for Indiana, I think, and this is the same point with Purdue, okay? In today's college basketball world, you have the five-star one-and-done players that are basically needing a place to go for a year before they turn their attention to the NBA. And you know when they come in that that's exactly what they're looking to do. And Kentucky is a prime example of a team that, John Calipari would load up on they have number one recruiting class with, five-star players. And some years they would mesh together, and Kentucky was really darn good. And other years, you kind of didn't know, and they were feeling their way, and it wasn't until like February before you really knew who they were.
Yep.
And the year when John Calipari won in Kentucky, yes, he had dynamic one-and-done players. Anthony Davis is pretty darn special, but he also had four-year seniors that were contributing players that were balancing out that wet behind the ears nature of the roster. And for this Indiana team, the thing that I think where Mike Woodson, maybe not even by design, but rather almost by luck, what is really promising for Indiana, in my opinion, you have two guys in Kel'el Ware and Mackenzie Mgbako who probably have, in Kel'el Ware's case, he had to go through a redemption story this year of showing that, in fact, the narrative about him at Oregon was disingenuous. And so far, he's been able to do that. Now, 10 games does not a season make. Mackenzie Mgbako is one that his body type, his fluidity, and his shooting stroke alone, based on reputation and narrative, are going to keep him in the conversation of, like Jalen Hood-Schifino, getting drafted on potential. Jalen Hood-Schifino had games, though, Purdue notably, where he absolutely showed that his body size was such that he was going to be a good NBA player and was worth the investment. Romeo Langford, for example, different story. Langford had no motor at all and was one aspirin from a coma at all times, and that came back to bite him in the NBA. But when you get five-star players like a Malik Reneau, and that's where I'm going with this, sometimes you need a little bit of luck. And that little bit of luck for Indiana, odd as it sounds, comes when you get a massive player, and in Purdue's case, Zach Edey. Now, Edey obviously didn't come in as a five-star, one-and-done prospect player, but he grew himself into the best player in college basketball, worked himself, is a better way of saying it, and they schemed him into the best player in college basketball. But he's the best player in college basketball who didn't have a guaranteed NBA future, and so therefore you get him for multiple years. Malik Reneau is a guy that came in and there was thought process he was going to be a one-and-done player, but he grew into becoming a really solid player that is not yet NBA ready. And so as a result, Indiana's going to get him for multiple years, and I give him credit for understanding and accepting that role, and he is benefiting now from Kel'el Ware there, like he did a year ago with Trace Jackson-Davis, admittedly, but he just seems more comfortable in what he's doing, Jimmy, and I think he's a really good player, and is a really good player that probably is going to even be back at Indiana next year, quite frankly. Now, I could be wrong. He could go to the portal or whatever else. There's a million places to go. But they're starting to get signs of contribution from players outside of strictly like the big two. You know, a year ago, Xavier Johnson and Trace Jackson-Davis and as well Jalen Hood-Schifino going into the year were the guys you knew were going to be the guys, and then obviously you get injured, it factors into that. But they kind of always felt like they were riding a two-horse race. And I think now they're starting to get some complementary contributions that are offsetting those, you know, the two big horses, and that makes them more versatile and kind of quietly makes them pretty good. But at 7-1, people just, for whatever reason, they've kind of dropped out of the national narrative.
Well, there's two reasons primarily for it, and as long as they get a little bit better in both, it might not matter. When you look into the numbers, and I don't want to get too far into like the analytical weeds, but they are top in almost every national percentile of at the rim field goal percentage, to basically layup or post up actions, and then points in the paint, they're 94th percentile. When you look at their 3-point attempts, their 3-point percentage, their corner 3-point percentage, they're towards the worst in the country. The one area
they got to find shooters.
They got to find shooters, but the one area where, as long as they get a little bit better, and this is going to change, of course. They played 2 games in the Big Ten. But if you could simulate what they've done defensively from beyond the arc, and if they play it this well and this highly efficient over the course of an entire Big Ten schedule, if they're only shooting 33%, but they're holding opponents under 30, right now it's under 20. That's not sustainable. But if that's your area where your trade-off is we're not going to make a lot of threes, but you're not going to hit a lot of threes against us either, it offsets to a way that can be a type of winning basketball for Indiana. The problem is they need to, as they hit their stride over the next couple of months, find more consistency from beyond the arc. Not a level that's leading the country, but a level that is about average.
Jeff Rabjohns going to join us top of the hour. When we come back on the other side, guys, I'm going to put you to the test here. Don't check your phones. Time Magazine has named their Person of the Year for 2023.
Oh, I know this answer.
Pretty sure I do too.
How did you know, Eddie?
I was listening to the wake-up call this morning.
Oh, I thought it just came out.
No.
I thought they just announced it like in the last hour.
Oh, no.
Were you surprised by it? Do you agree with it?
I don't agree with it, no.
Jimmy, you surprised by it? Agree with it?
Don't really get torn up one way or another about Person of the Year, so I don't know. I was unfazed by it.
We'll tell you who it is next.
Heat and cool places where ductwork won't fit using
So, and in my defense, Jimmy, you got to defend me here. Literally, the thing I saw that came across my phone said 4 minutes ago, released from Time Magazine. Apparently, it was 4 hours ago when this came out, or 5 hours ago.
Yeah.
So my apologies that I didn't hear the guys talking about this morning. But Taylor Swift is the Time Magazine Person of the Year. Eddie, tell me why you disagree.
Other than going on tour, what has she done? And get with Travis Kelce.
I mean, you could argue the tour part from an economic standpoint has been great for.
I mean, she's basically revitalized the economy of like 20 different American cities.
She's a walking Super Bowl anywhere she goes.
I don't know. I would have to see what all she's done in terms of impact, but it just kind of surprised me.
Well, her impact is the fact that, first off, no matter her influence on young people, in particular young women, I think that she's had a major impact for a lot of young girls. The thing about Taylor Swift, and I said this before, and I think people thought I was being critical of her. I'm saying it as a compliment. The thing about Taylor Swift, she's an attractive woman, don't get me wrong, right? But she's not like
Salma Hayek.
Correct. And so, and by her own admission, she, and just kind of in the theme of her songs and whatever else, you know, she has about her an aura of like not worrying about other doubts or having like a personal confidence to carry her through and being vulnerable about her own relationships and things like that. I do think that she has I don't know, I don't have daughters, but I know people who do, and I think she's had a major influence and impact for young girls in this country just in terms of like a belief about themselves. But in addition to that, quite frankly, I think to a great extent, one of her great contributions is that she's like brought families together, because you have guys that are taking their daughters to a concert that it gives them a reason to like bond with their daughter and have a night out. But she has absolutely jump-started the economy in a lot of areas. I mean, she did, 4 straight sold-out nights in Dallas? And like right now, I mean, when the concert she's announced for Indianapolis, you can't get a hotel room within like 20 miles of Indianapolis already for, I don't remember when that show is, but like way, way out. And by the way, a public service announcement, the people on your Facebook page, like the friends of your parents that are 70 years old, they're not selling Taylor Swift tickets. They've been hacked. That's not real. Don't fall for it. Don't buy it, right?
Yes.
I'm not a huge, I mean, I don't have anything against her. I don't know a lot about her. And I think that the Travis Kelce thing has introduced her to even a wider audience, although I think most people are familiar with her. But I also think it pushed her a little bit closer towards that oversaturation fatigue factor. And I know that people who are diehard fans of her will throw you down a flight of stairs about how wrong it is for me to say that. But I do think that it kind of puts her in a category of the elusive, enigmatic nature about her dissolves a little bit, which makes her a little bit more socially norm, which can lead to a fatigue factor about her. But her impact in the last 3 months, it's difficult to go in any aspect of the American culture and not hear something about her, right?
Yeah, I don't think that fatigue happens amongst her fans, right, within the music industry,
sure.
but in
right
terms of the
that.
national conversation,
You're
yes,
right.
it's the same effect whenever you see LeBron or Aaron Rodgers or whoever on ESPN for like 9 straight hours, and you're like, okay, enough, I don't care anymore.
I think for a lot of people, though, for a lot of her fans, Jimmy, part of the intrigue about her was this perception that, like, you didn't see her for a couple of months because she's just working on an album by herself, writing it by herself, and then she comes out and releases it, and the top 10 songs of it all go like 1 through 10 on the chart, and that was really your only exposure to her. And then you find out now, like, wait a minute, she does have like the good-looking boyfriend that plays in the NFL. And in other words, I think for a lot of girls, they saw themselves in her, and the more that she is now in that realm of being in the press box with the star football player who's a good-looking guy but controversial, creates more distance between that is me that I'm seeing on television versus that is something that, again, celebrities are that I won't be. That's the one risk she runs. But nonetheless, Person of the Year. Jeff Rabjohns next.
The speed,
Do you know, by the way, do you know who this woman, Joan Jett, had a relationship with like 3 years ago?
Is this where you tell me it's Mike Tyson and we have the discussion of, Mike Tyson being incarcerated here?
We should ask Jeff Rabjohns if he would be surprised you didn't know that, but we're not going to. But Jeff would side with me on that.
No, I have no idea who.
Carmen Electra. Joan Jett and Carmen Electra were an item, apparently.
Learn something new every day.
I know. How about
Educate
that,
and entertain.
That's what we try to do. And in that case, get the mind going. Jeff Rabjohns joins us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so on that segue from, of course, Peegs.com. And Jeff, we're going to have you on to talk Indiana basketball. Last night we've been talking a lot about the win over Michigan. But before we do that, I want to get your thoughts on, because you are all-encompassing when it comes to Indiana athletic knowledge. I will absolutely eat crow on this, Jeff Rabjohns. I thought Indiana was going to diddle-dally around and hire a committee and do a search and let every other coach get plucked and then end up with kind of a lackluster hire in their head football search. And I thought they hit a home run. I thought they got a guy that, quite frankly, I'm like, man, I'm surprised nobody else earlier had come in and swooped in and taken Curt Cignetti. And he's not holding anything back so far. Your thoughts on the hire?
It was a fantastic hire. It's arguably one of the better hires IU's made in its football history when you talk about somebody who has a track record and fits. It's certainly their best hire in the last 3, 4, 5 hiring cycles for them. It's kind of interesting. I was told about somewhere around midway through the season, somebody came to me and said, "Hey, Rabby, just so you're aware that if this season goes south, the buyout for Tom Allen will not prevent Indiana from making a change if they feel that's the right move." I said, "Oh, interesting. Okay." Because the prevailing wisdom, everybody thought $20 million, IU can't come up with that, blah, blah, blah. So I said, okay. So I called Matt Weaver, our lead football writer, who is fantastic covering IU football, but he knows so many people around the country covering recruiting. And I said, "Hey, by the way, this is what I was told." And he said, "Oh, man, they should go get Curt Cignetti." I was like, "Who?" He said, "Curt Cignetti." Like, "Matt, who in the hell are you talking about? Who's Curt Cignetti?" And he's like, "Oh, the guy from James Madison." I was like, "What are you talking about? Go get somebody from James Madison?" What? And I was like, "Okay, explain this to me." He's like, "Listen, he goes to Indiana University, Pennsylvania. They're bad. He makes them good. He goes to Elon. They'd won, like, I can't remember what it was, but like very few games. I think it was something like 12 games in 4 years prior to Cignetti's arrival. They won 14 in the 2 he's there.
Yeah, he leaves and they buy
Madison.
Twitter. I mean, come on,
Yeah. And then he goes to James Madison, which was a good FCS level program, but he leads them in the transition to the FBS level and wins more at the FBS level than James Madison had before at the FCS level. So we were like, look, he builds programs. He understands what it's like to work without like the most resources in the world. He understands what it's like to build a program. He understands what it's like to get players and have to develop them. He's had multiple quarterbacks win Offensive Player of the Year in his conference. Multiple quarterbacks mean not just different human beings, but different types of quarterbacks. He's had multiple 1,000 yards receivers as different kind of guys, some long threats, some more slot guys, what have you. He's like, this guy would give Indiana a chance to win, become a regular bowl contender. He knows how to recruit. James Madison actually has a collective, so he understands the NIL space. And he was like, the guy they should go get is Curt Cignetti. And this was somewhere around the middle of the year. So I'm like, okay, all right, you sold me. I'm discreetly make a few phone calls and to some agents and folks and just try to find out, like, hey, what do you guys think? If you were Indiana, let me throw a name at you, and you give me a ranking, A, B, C, D, F higher. And I threw it out there, and they were all like, oh, that's an A+ for Indiana, but I don't know if they can get him. That was the answer that I got, outside of a couple people who were like, well, if Indiana's willing to pay, maybe, but James Madison ain't broke, and that dude's got a great situation. I said, okay. So, and then lo and behold, here we are a little bit later, and Indiana has Curt Cignetti as its head football coach. I think they did an absolutely fantastic job, and I think Scott Dolson deserves a ton of credit because he put time into studying some things, and I even wrote about this week or so back. He took some time studying programs that kind of had to get off the mat, so to speak, or programs where basketball history dwarfs football history, like a North Carolina, like a Duke, like a Kansas, teams that are winning now in football, but obviously they're more known for their basketball. And Scott Dolson put a ton of time in studying and getting to know people and finding out, okay, what does it take? What are the things that really work? What are important things? So Scott Dolson walked into this situation with a very clear plan. Here's the type of coach we need. We're going to talk to multiple people. And, he's never said out loud, so I don't know if Cignetti was number one on the list the whole time. I have my personal suspicions that was the case. I do not know. But it was a really clearly focused search. And like you said, Indiana University has got to be one of the leaders in the country at the production and manufacture of BS red tape. It's like, all right, what kind of toilet paper should we need? Well, I'll buy. I don't know. Let's form a committee. And let's study it, and let's get to. I'm like, committee. It's like Indiana University, get rid of some of the daggum committees. And they did this without a committee, And I think Scott Dolson deserves a lot of credit for the fact that this was a very streamlined and very focused process.
Where do you think, Jeff, or do we know, was it rainy day fund money? Was there a specific booster? And I'm not saying that we would know the name, but do you think one person stepped up and said, here's the buyout money? Did they take it from it? Where did the money come from? Or did they have it all along and we just were naive?
No, I think there are how can I phrase this? I think there are options. Because there is some booster money there that could be used if necessary. There's some money as television revenues increased that could be used or even borrowed against. There's mechanisms that we've seen from some SEC schools in the past where a university on paper has loaned its athletic department money and blah, 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 and then the accountants do this and that over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So from my understanding, I think there are options at this point in time. But negotiating the buyout down was always a part of the plan as it's been explained to me. I do not know that for sure, but that's what I was told. And I was also told that, no, this is not going to hurt the varsity club or anybody else or NIL. There are some options here for IU moving forward as far as, paying the two installments, $7.75 million, to Coach Tom Allen over the next 2 years.
And here's the thing. Not only did Curt Cignetti get win the press conference, Jeff, as we talked about before we get to basketball, clearly they gave him note cards on what to say when he went out at midcourt at Assembly Hall, right?
Yeah, I thought that was fantastic for a new coach to do. And here's why I think that.
And for those unfamiliar, he went out to midcourt, he was introduced, he waved to the crowd, and then by all account, he told Andy and Kevin on the morning show spontaneously, he just said, you know what? And he said the line of Purdue sucks, and everybody cheers, and then he goes, and by the way, so do Ohio State and Michigan. I'm paraphrasing, but and the crowd went bonkers, right?
Yeah. And I thought it was a great move, and here's why. He's not really saying sucks as in an evaluation of their program. He's using the word sucks I don't like them, And what was he doing by saying that? He was immediately identifying with IU fans. He's like, oh, you guys, who don't you like? You don't like Purdue? Hey, me neither. Oh, what do you guys had to deal with for years in the Big Ten East? You had to deal with Michigan, Ohio State. You sick of that crap? Yeah, me too. So I thought it was a great move. He, in about 5 seconds of speaking, in his very first public appearance outside of a press conference, but his first time talking to a large group of IU fans, I thought he did a phenomenal job of identifying himself with IU fans in a way that IU fans cheered and absolutely loved.
I mean, Purdue fans spend a fair portion of literally any game they ever play, regardless of Indiana's playing against them or not, with an IU sucks chant. So I feel like all bets are off in terms of that type of back and forth between the two programs. It's well established, and I, too, enjoyed it, Jeff. I have one last question about Cignetti. You mentioned he's won everywhere that he's been. Well, what's the – and it's been first-year success at times. He had 8 wins more than the previous head coach at James Madison when he got there. He turned Elon around. They won 4 conference games over a 4-year span before he got there. what would winning be in his first year at Indiana, assuming it's a jump start out of the gate? What is a realistic bar for Curt Cignetti year one at IU?
If he gets to a bowl game, it's a home run. If you go to a bowl game at Indiana in football, it's a good year. I don't care if it's the whogivesacrap.com bowl. It's like if you go to a bowl, that's a good season. And if he gets them to a bowl in year one, that's a really good season.
I want to shift now towards basketball last night. Look at Michigan as a whole. I'm not one to poo-poo any win in conference, especially in the Big Ten, and I give a lot of credit to Mike Woodson for the fact that they've now beaten Michigan in 4 straight meetings. But as you look at Michigan and where they're at currently, what is the quality of that win long-term for the 2023-24 Hoosiers?
Well, I mean, we'll see. It's just the first 2. These are the 2 December Big Ten games.
Right.
So exactly what it's going to project to be, you don't know. That's going to depend upon, how Doug McDaniel plays moving forward for Michigan. How do they play? Are they moving forward going to be more like the team that beat St. John's at Madison Square Garden, or are they going to be more like the team that lost at home to Long Beach? We don't know. But I think for Indiana, the biggest thing is, it's Indiana starting to win games they should win or could win. And we've all seen over the past 4 or 5 years or so, Indiana lose games, so you look at and go, shouldn't have lost that one, And so Indiana's sitting there, with only 1 loss, and the 1 loss is to UConn, a team that's clearly playing like a Final Four contender, if not a title contender. And but they're winning the games they're supposed to win, and they're beating Big Ten teams they're supposed to beat. So I think that's the biggest thing for Indiana, that they are winning the games that they're supposed to win, or should win, could win, however you want to phrase it. And they're not they haven't stubbed their toe yet, and that's a really good sign. That in itself is actually a sign of progress when you look at some of the times Indiana has stubbed its toe over the past 4 or 5 years.
Jeff, what's Indiana's Achilles at this point? If Mike Woodson is, in the cave, to use that term in Assembly Hall, late at night watching film, he is looking at what as the area, and aside from three-point shooting, I guess, that's going to be the obvious, but maybe an area that they have the personnel to do it, but so far just schematically or execution-wise have not done so. What, aside from three-point shooting, jumps out?
Just overall guard play. Certainly with Xavier Johnson out. Their overall guard play. I think it was 22 minutes into the game last night, and IU starting backcourt combined for 2 points, which puts an enormous burden on your front court. Now, IU's front court has been tremendous. Kel'el Ware, winning the Michigan game, averaging almost 18 points per game. That's almost triple the 6.6 he averaged last year. Malik Reneau, as Coach Hurley of UConn said, that dude's a killer. And, his ability to function when you need him, there are a couple times down the stretch, they put him on the block, threw it to him, cleared out. Michigan brought the double team, and he used perfect technique, banged the defender behind him, stepped through the double team, and scored with the game pretty much on the line, or at least the game in the balance. And Mackenzie Mgbako, he's now getting into double figures. He's got a tremendous amount of offensive potential. Got to realize it at some point, but there is skill there. So when your guard play is suspect or not really producing, it puts a ton of pressure on the front court. Now, Mike Woodson will tell you, and I know he will tell you this because I've asked a couple times, basically they're going to play to their strengths. If the front court he thinks can dominate in a game, they are going to go to the front court. But at some point in time, obviously, guard play has to be a little more productive. Trey Galloway's, three-point shooting obviously hasn't been where it was last year. Indiana needs him to sort of regain that form. Needs to get Xavier Johnson healthy. That would certainly help them, because Xavier Johnson is the one guard that Indiana has who can really turn the corner and get into the paint on a ball screen. Gabe Cupps did a really good job last night in running the offense and not turning it over. He had 1 turnover in 32 minutes in his first start on the road, and it was a Big Ten road venue. I know Michigan's not great. I get that. But we're still talking about a freshman, first road start, 1 turnover, 32 minutes, while also having to guard a guy like Doug McDaniel, who went off for 30-some points the previous game. But overall, I think, the thing that for Indiana is guard play. and three-point shooting. And there was certainly some encouraging signs last night when you look at what C.J. Gunn did. Hitting 2 threes, getting 4 steals. You get 4 steals from a guard or wing off the bench, that is tremendous defensive impact. And you look at some of the advanced analytics as far as overall impact in the game that counts, scoring, rebounding, passing, plus, minus while you're on the court, all that put together. The player last night's game who had the best analytical impact was C.J. Gunn. So they start getting those kind of performances from C.J. Gunn. That really does help their guard play as well. I mean, if you get last night's C.J. Gunn with any regularity, now you've got a whole nother option coming off the bench at the guard position, wing position, whatever you want to call C.J. But overall, to answer your question, guard play continuing to step forward, each week, each month, that would certainly really help Indiana's chances, as you look toward March.
Jeff, when Jeff Rabjohns is our guest, when Xavier Johnson first had the foot injury and came out and he was wearing a boot, I was told at that time they thought, it was possible that it was going to be a 4-game injury. Where do things stand? What are you hearing in terms of when he may be back?
To be determined at this point. It's one of those things where you got to see how it heals. And, we've all been around sports long enough to see foot injuries that, sometimes it's like, okay, it was a week. We've also seen some of them where, for whatever reason, it takes a few weeks. So at this point in time, it's kind of to be determined. I know it's a terrible answer here on radio, but that's kind of where it's at. It's like I was told, I talked to some people, and they were like, got to see how he heals. No idea. So might be short term, might be, a few weeks. Just got to see how it heals. Right now, I don't think it's going to be long term. I don't think it's going to last until January, February or anything. But as far as, exactly when he's going to be back, to be determined.
Is Mackenzie Mgbako the kind of player, Jeff, and I assume you probably watched a lot of him before he, was wearing an Indiana jersey just in the trail before he got to Indiana, strikes me as the kind of guy that kind of just needs to be turned loose. In other words, he has the athleticism and the basketball instinct, especially from a quick release standpoint, to be able to just kind of go as opposed to get too reeled in. Am I too Freudian in that analysis? No, I don't think so at all. I think there's a strong case to be made for that because he is about 6'7", 6'8". He makes threes. He played a terrific program, Roselle Catholic, out there in New Jersey. Was a McDonald's All-American. He was really, really, really productive. 19.5, 10.6 rebounds, 3 assists as a junior. Similar numbers as a senior. Just really, really, really productive. And those are the kind of guys who you want them to get into a rhythm. Maybe they start the game 1 for 4. You're like, okay, so what? He may hit 5 of the next 6. And that's another thing that I think as he gets more comfortable, as maybe Mike Woodson just gets more comfortable utilizing him, running some things for him, I think he's a guy who, has the most potential to, quote, go off in a game of any of the IU players other than Kel'el Ware. And Ware has the most potential right now because he can score inside and occasionally can step out and hit a 3. But Mackenzie Mgbako, we all saw, the pin downs that Indiana's run for him. He's 4 for 4 on those shots. So you look at it and go, okay, well, what happens if you run that for him 4 times a game instead of 1? What happens if, you run that and the other team starts jumping it and then you hit him on a backdoor? And then, that shooting form is just, it's textbook. Everything's lined up from heels to hips to hands. He's got a lot of potential. So I think you're right that the more offensive opportunities you get for him, the more opportunity you give him to go out and all of a sudden have a 18, 20, 22-point game.
Jeff Rabjohns at Peegs.com, nice enough to take a few minutes with us. Jeff, when you look at IU in totality, 25% from beyond the arc this season, opponents are shooting 32%. Now that's mainly backwatered by some of their early contests and, of course, the loss at UConn. But when you look at a 2-game sample size. I get it against two teams that aren't necessarily top of the Big Ten this year, but they're 33% from beyond the arc, and they're only allowing teams 18% from that same range. I know that number specifically isn't sustainable defensively, but when you mentioned earlier that Coach Woodson wants them to play to their strengths, which is dominating points in the paint, high action, high percentile when they're right at the rim or right at the cup. If they're able to do that while getting marginally better from beyond the arc and even close to 30% or less from beyond the arc from a defensive rating, is that good enough to get where they want to go this year? Or do they need even further steps forward in both those categories, offensively from beyond the arc and defensively from downtown?
That'd get them really close. And I assume in this equation, we're just going to kind of assume that IU's front court continues to play well.
Right.
But, yeah, if you make that assumption, Indiana shooting 33%. Obviously, you want that to be more like 35, 36 if you can. But, if one more three per game in each of the last two games, and the percentages are incredibly different. So it's like, okay, 3 for 9, not ideal. You double it, 6 for 18. 6 for 18 isn't great, but 8 for 18 is dang good. So it's like they're really close. And again, they didn't have Xavier Johnson, who's 5 for 10 from 3. Not a big sample size, but his percentage is good. You get C.J. Gunn going, get a Mackenzie Mgbako going a little bit. One more 3 per game. 4 for 9 from 3 sounds and looks mathematically a lot different than 3 for 9. So, you take it and you double it, 3 for 9, double it, 6 for 18. Not great, but not terrible. But all of a sudden, if that's, if those are 4 for 9s and you double that, 8 for 18, that's good. They do have chances to improve from 3. And the other thing is, and you guys know this from being around the Big Ten a long time, the Big Ten's incredibly well scouted. If opponents don't even think you're going to take threes, they're not even really going to game plan to go out and get you. And as the season moves along, and we saw this under the Archie Miller era, Indiana opponents, their defense, it was like maybe a step beyond the arc. Then it was at the arc. Then it was a step inside the arc. And the space for interior players, post players, baseline players really got so congested that they had problems operating. So one of the things you want to do is at least when opponents scout you, make them believe that you're capable of hitting a 3 here or there, and they need to come out and get you, or at least step to the arc, one step past the arc. So I think it would help IU for the 3-point attempts to, 9's not enough moving forward. Now, you don't have to go out there and do like some teams that bomb 25 to 28 a game. But, if you can get that number to, even for IU, even if they're not going to take a ton, get it to 15 to 18, that could help Mackenzie Mgbako, Kel'el Ware, and Malik Reneau. Just give them a little more space, a little less congestion, so they have a chance to operate as well. So I think it's two things going on at the same time.
Jeff, you and I've had – Jeff Rabjohns is our guest talking IU basketball here. You and I've had, I don't know, over the years, what would you say, 5-10 conversations on the phone that just kind of shoot in the bowl that usually lasts like 45 minutes, something like that. Maybe like every 6 months or so, right? So
conversations too.
Right. And so that my brain just works sometimes completely randomly and like just on like out of left field, right? So I'm going to give you a left field question, okay?
All right.
I'm curious of this. You've traveled around the Big Ten. You've been in different arenas. You've seen the different fan bases, football, basketball, all of it. Hypothetically speaking, let's say that the 247 Sports Network Peegs, they come to you and they go, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a fun little thing where each of you is going to spend a year in the shoes of one of your contemporaries for a different Big Ten program. So we're going to pull one out of a hat, and you, Jeff, are going to have to do exactly what you do with Indiana, but for a different Big Ten team for the year. Based on just the fans, the people seem pretty cool. It's a cool place to live. The arena's cool. What Big Ten program is the one that if they told you that, you'd go, you know what, that's cool. I can live with that. That'd be cool for a year. Which one are you picking?
Oh, man. That's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me anything like that before. That's a nice question, Jake. I'm sitting here thinking, we're counting, I would be covering football and basketball?
Yep. Let's say primarily hoops. I mean, kind of the same. Well, you do both for Indiana, so.
Okay, if we're taking both into account.
By the way, this is non-expansion, so we're not going Oregon, Washington, UCLA, USC. This is Big Ten as it stands right now.
I gotcha. Yeah, what we got right now. Yeah. Otherwise, you pick one of the LA schools.
I'll take UCLA for 100, please, Alex.
Yeah, Ravi, we're gonna pay you, but we're gonna let you go live in LA for free for a year. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Man, I'm trying to think of where I would actually probably take. Part of me would lean Michigan State because of what Izzo does with his basketball teams most years. As far as their teams that usually grow over the course of the year. And not all at the same rate, not all end up at the same destination, but some of those Final Four teams that he had.
You're right.
They stubbed their toe in November, even in December. Sometimes even in January, looked at him and said, he might get to the Sweet 16. They're all right. And then all of a sudden, he really gets it figured out. And I think covering Tom Izzo's basketball team day to day would be fascinating. Obviously, Michigan State with football, with they've had off the field issues that would be unpleasant.
I think Michigan State, and look, I know that Michigan State athletics has had its issues, but I'll be honest, Jeff. Like I've always gotten the impression that Michigan State, like in the state of Michigan, that just like normal, cool, laid back people are Michigan State fans. Like they just seem like decent dudes. You know what I mean? And women. I don't know.
Yeah, I've always gotten the sense Michigan State seems like its athletic programs are a little more for the regular folk.
Right.
Michigan's crowd just seems a little more like high end. Even like last night, there were some, people who were like, I was like, are you going to the club with Buffy for drinks after? What are we dressed up for? What's going on here?
Right. Yeah.
And everybody has the right to be, if you got millions of dollars, spend it, have a great time. I'm not denigrating anybody. I'm trying to think of. I would probably pick Michigan State. I think that's who I would probably pick. Ohio State football is really interesting just from the standpoint.
Yeah, but do you really want to be around those nut jobs? Come on, man. Hell no. That's all you. You have at, man. Traffic in Columbus sucks, too. No way. All right, how about this, Jeff?
If that's a Big Ten school in a city, and it's like I think the better Big Ten schools are in towns.
Of course.
I understand they're all cities, but it's more like, East Lansing to me, I would call it more a college town than city. It's like Columbus is Columbus, even if you took Ohio State and moved it to wherever, Akron, who knows, But I like college towns. I think college towns are fun. So
okay.
I'd probably lean Michigan State.
Here's my last one for you. I always ask my buddies this, whether they're an IU or a Purdue fan, okay? If you're a fan of Indiana or Purdue, you obviously want to see Indiana or Purdue win the Big Ten. Who do you think is the most innocuous, harmless Big Ten program that if they were to win the Big Ten, the highest percentage of Indiana or Purdue fans would go, yeah, that's cool. I got no problem with them. If we can't win it, that's cool. I'm happy for them. What school is it?
You're assuming there's a proportion of either one of those fan bases who is ambivalent toward anything related to Big Ten basketball?
Well, true. But if you had to pick one, like Indiana fans, I grew up an Indiana fan, right? I didn't like Purdue because I was an Indiana fan. But I didn't like Michigan because I couldn't stand Antoine Joubert and Bill Frieder. I didn't like there were other programs that there was definitely Illinois, was a rivalry between Knight and Henson. So the one program that offers the least rivalry nature to it.
And we're assuming programs that matter in basketball, because I think if Penn State had some miraculous run, I think people would be like, okay.
Yeah,
they had their run.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Cinderella year.
I would say Minnesota. Does anybody really hate Minnesota? That Gopher's kind of cute. Their colors are like, what they play in a cool arena. It's like 900 degrees below zero, so you feel sorry for people there. Like Minnesota's fine, right?
Yeah, because I think, Minnesota would be all right. Penn State would be all right because I don't think people would get up in arms. And I don't think there's anything about either one of those that's clearly hateable.
Right,
like you said, with whether you're looking at perspective of Indiana or Purdue, there's something they could pick out about like Michigan we don't like, about Michigan State we don't like, about Ohio State. Oh, we don't like them. They took Thad Matta and he took Indiana players and we don't like them. And there's reasons for either of those fan bases to dislike Wisconsin. People are like, I don't like Bo Ryan. Everybody, the rat-faced guy. And I'm like, well, who really cares what he looks like? It ain't his fault. I mean, come on,
He can coach.
But people didn't like Wisconsin. They didn't. There were reasons. I don't know if they're really reasons, but there were factors that led to the fan bases not liking certain schools. Yeah, I would say Minnesota or Penn State probably, if they won it, people would shrug their shoulders and go, okay, whatever.
Prior to 2023 calendar year, could I have said Northwestern safely? I feel like that's now off the table with Purdue, but couldn't I have probably said that?
Purdue, Minnesota's a house of horrors for Purdue as well. But Northwestern could play though, right?
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden now Northwestern could play. Jeff, we appreciate the time as always, man. We'll continue reading you on Peaks.com.
Thanks, man. You guys have a great week.
All right, thanks. Jeff Rabjohns on the guest line. We're a little over. We'll take a little break. Todd Meyer just walked in, which usually means he's about to scold me for the fact that we're over. So we'll do exactly that. We'll come back and get into what's going to happen over the next couple of days in the NBA and how it affects not only the Pacers, but what you're going to hear on this radio station. That next.
My little brother's
Really interesting question from Josh. Hey, Jake, has anybody asked or answered the question as to why the big game in Vegas is scheduled for 5 o'clock Eastern? Seems like a huge miss for the NBA. That actually is a good question. I've
got a couple thoughts here.
Okay.
I've got 3. 1, they didn't want something directly. They didn't want 2 games going up against Thursday Night Football because Thursday Night Football is not on local television outside of the local market of the 2 teams playing. So
I don't disagree with that point.
If you're watching football, you're exclusively on Amazon Prime, and it's not something you can switch back and forth with. So if you're watching football, you're going to be watching football.
Okay.
Unless you can't do a multi-view or whatever you can on YouTube TV. So that's one option here. Second option is it gives people time to clear out the arena, time for them to clean it out, get ready for the next game. The third option is that you have a gap between the games, and it allows people like us, pundits, whatever, to be able to consume what they just watched and then be able to talk about it for a little bit before the next game is possible.
And they couldn't do this on obviously they have a full slate of games on a Saturday, so they couldn't do it on a Saturday.
Well, the finals on Saturday, the way the schedule
Well, I know,
worked out.
but I'm just saying, like, they couldn't have done like Saturday, Sunday. You know what I mean? What I'm getting at is if you had to do it like in daytime hours, could they not have done it on a weekend? I think part of it also.
I couldn't imagine they would want teams playing a back-to-back, a semifinal then championship game on Saturday and Sunday, and then most of these teams have a game scheduled for Monday.
Especially since it doesn't count as an actual regular season game. It's an added game if you get to the final.
The only drawback to this in-season tournament, because it's been a huge hit, the only drawback to it would be the fact that, like, for example, the Pacers-Celtics game on Monday, even though it was, we talked about how it was an awesome atmosphere. It was one of the best atmospheres I've been in a long time. And maybe this is a good thing that it was hard for people from, like, Boston to buy tickets for it, but, you basically, it came with a week's advance notice. It wasn't like you knew forever ago when that game was going to be played. So that would be the one drawback for it. But the one thing that I think is kind of fun about it is, and this doesn't help TV numbers, I get it, but there is an element to it, and this is, I'm almost embarrassed to say this because it sounds so absurd, but having 2 games in December in non-primetime hours kind of feels like the NCAA tournament. It kind of feels like like people take like a vacation at work to be able to watch it or tune in or whatever else, and it makes it a fun and exciting. I think it makes it clearly shows it as separated from the regular season of the NBA, even though it's a regular season game.
It's a neutral site event. That doesn't happen in the NBA, right? Unlike the other sports, well, I guess baseball and the NBA both fit into this, but there are not a ton of neutral site games played. You have All-Star Weekend and usually about it, right? Everything else is home and home type of games for your schedule breakdown. And then once you get to the playoffs, I will be interested to see what the environment is like. They're playing in T-Mobile Arena, which isn't like a massive venue, but it is a
been there,
very
by the
nice
way.
venue. Yeah.
Have you been there?
I've been outside it, never inside it.
It's cool.
But I've been outside it. It's a nice venue. You're looking at their tipping point, about 17,000, 18,000 capacity for basketball, or when they've had hockey in there. So that's the home of the Vegas Golden Knights. So they have hockey in there all the time. But I wonder how it looks on TV, because I don't hate the idea of it being a neutral site. But to your point, Jake, with it being such a quick turnaround, how many Pacers fans, like, I love the Pacers. I would love an opportunity just to go straight to Vegas as a fan. But how many Pacers fans realistically are going from that Monday night game to, okay, I need to go on kayak right now, get some flights.
Naptown Seth, I guarantee he's going to be there, right? But, you're right. I mean,
will it pop? Is it going to feel like an NCAA tournament game, or is it going to feel like a playoff game on a neutral site like it did at Gamebridge the other night? Or is it going to feel...
You raise a really interesting point.
What does the court look like?
I'm sure that's up on NBA.com.
Nobody knows.
Oh, it's a mystery. They're keeping it.
The interesting point there is the fact that for Pacer fans, you didn't know for certain they were going to be in it until 72 hours advance notice of the game.
Right.
it's a pretty tough plane ticket to just to just head out and take, right?
Like, I wouldn't hate this being the semifinal and the final, and that's the. Let me finish the thought first. The semifinal and the final being more spaced out or further along in the season, I wouldn't hate. And the reason these are all okay things to feel about the in-season tournament is it worked. Like, regardless of whether or not you think it needs fine-tune, which I think it does, the in-season tournament worked for the NBA. You look at a lot of different ways they measure ratings. Interest has been up far more than it's been in quite some times for random regular season games in November. So that's already a win. The eyeballs are there. We'll see what the numbers do for the semifinal and the final, but if the largest takeaway the NBA has after this thing is done, removing the Pacers from it for a second, because there's local elements to this too. But if the worst thing the NBA has to deal with post in-season tournament inaugural event is here's how we fine-tune it, that's a massive win for a product that people are like, is this really going to work? Is there going to be interest here? If all it is, hey, we nailed it, but we need to fine-tune it and modify it in a couple different ways, that's a win out of the gate for the NBA.
You know, as we talked about earlier, one of the interesting things about this tournament now is you have, if in fact, and I don't know that it's applicable because you're not talking about prime time, at least for Thursday numbers anyway in terms of the viewership times, but you have Los Angeles in it, television market number 2. But then outside of that, New Orleans, television market, I think 50 or 52. Indianapolis, television market 25. Milwaukee, television market 38. So you've got the smaller market teams, quote unquote, in it.
I'll push back on that in this scenario for 2 reasons. And one definitely carries the cachet where the market doesn't matter. The other one, I don't know. We'll start with the easy answer. Giannis Antetokounmpo is a face of the league, right? And that having them there, even though they're a smaller market,
true,
inherently should draw eyeballs. The other wild card to that, and he's been having a great year to this point, this is a jumping off point potentially the rest of the season in his career for Zion Williamson.
Got to stay healthy, though.
Correct.
Because his health is such that he's kind of fallen out of the public conscience.
Correct. But this is, again, they're going to be the real primetime window. They're going to be at 9 o'clock.
Right.
There's enough buzz, I feel like, for the stars that are at the table, and Tyrese Halliburton to a larger extent as he continues to capture the national audience, building off of his first triple-double in the win against Boston on Monday. There's enough cachet from a star power standpoint in the uniqueness of this single elimination event that I don't think it's as much of a death sentence as, say, when we were laughing about the World Series viewership numbers with the markets that were represented.
I think for a lot of people, Jimmy, the NBA season...
December, right? Yeah,
correct.
Christmas is opening day for the NBA.
So I work in racing, okay? Racing is a summer sport. I don't think that anybody who is actively around it would dispute that. Like, it feels like summertime. And when I'm at races in June or July, they are epicentered sport within, those races are, there's a lot of attention, a lot of fanfare, whatever else. It definitely feels like the sports calendar changes, even though the NFL, every year when the NFL, like training camp, I always say to people, I'm like, just be careful. I know people are excited about training camp, but be careful because it's wonderful out right now and you're getting ice cream at 8:30 at night and you're wearing shorts and a T-shirt, and all of a sudden you blink your eyes twice and you're in week 11 and you're scraping your windshield. Because as soon as the NFL season starts, you do a calendar flip in your head, whether you're doing it on on your phone or not. The NFL season, as soon as everybody gets together in Canton and that game takes place, and then they cancel it 30 minutes later because the field is coagulating or whatever it was, and they got the Shrek fella banging on hotel doors. When all that starts happening, people's minds automatically switch to it is fall.
The leaves actually start falling, believe it or not, when the ball is kicked on opening night of the NFL.
That's
a lot
correct.
of people don't know that.
That's correct.
It's a real scientific
fact. But that is how it feels. Like summer is over when the NFL season begins.
Correct.
And for a lot of people, so the NFL season then carries through to people and dominates their mindset. until, and even though there's 6 weeks of coexistence between the NFL and the NBA, it is not really until like the triple or quadruple header on Christmas Day that people are like, oh, the NBA's playing. This has changed that.
That was their hope.
Quite frankly.
Right?
This has changed that as it's given people reason to talk, which is exactly what we just did.
Bullseyeeventgroup.com and the Colts VIP tailgate presented by Hayes.
Of the day gets started right at 3:15. A little midweek Premier League action across the pond. We'll take Manchester City to one of the money line over Aston Villa. In that same game, give me Man City star striker Erling Haaland as an anytime goal scorer. Back here in the States in the NBA, we'll take the Cleveland Cavaliers on the money line over the Orlando Magic. And in college basketball tonight, little Big 12 Big East Challenge will scoop 8.5. Texas is 8.5-point dogs on the road against Marquette. 4-1 yesterday. Eddie has informed me he does not have anything today, though I've no doubt that will change tomorrow with so much excitement around the NBA and the in-season tournament.
Is it Aston Villa or Ashton Villa?
I think it's Ashton Villa. I think I said it wrong.
Okay.
I'll take the fine. It's on me.
This, by the way, on Twitter X from Nathan. Hey, guys, more than 72 hours notice allows a fan base to make that trip to Vegas. I get it. Logistically, you're right.
What income bracket?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people on that short of notice, typically the flights are a little more expensive. And in addition to that, you're talking about at minimum 2 days off of work, which on 3 days advance notice.
At this stage of the year, like how many days do you have left unless you're a day hoarder? Like how many personal days off do you have left?
Well,
we should ask Mark Dykton.
You should ask me.
Or Eddie, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been that camp.
But you get what I'm saying. I think for a lot of
yeah.
people, that's a tough travel on a 3-day
and that's
notice.
not even the gate. Like how much it's going to cost to get in there?
That's a good question, too. We should see. Let's see how much tickets are going for, right? If we go to...
we don't have a ticket sponsor, correct?
No.
I'm just going to go to one of the major online ticket outlets. How's that?
Okay.
I don't think Bullseye's doing a trip out there. So looking at that...
You cannot even get them on my favorite ticket website. So
Really?
Yeah.
Can't believe you would pick that app, Jimmy.
I know. So just a tick away.
Okay, I'm looking right now. Oh, you might be right.
So I don't know where you get tickets unless it's
could
maybe
be
directed
sold
to the team.
out.
If
What
that's
if
the
it's
case,
sold
that's
out?
awesome. I'd love that. Yes, because I want it to feel like an NCAA. It won't feel this way, but I want it to feel like an NCAA tournament.
Okay, I have it right here.
Game.
I have it right here.
All right.
Semifinals. Are we going with 2 tickets or one?
2.
2 tickets, okay? So we're going to go with 2 tickets. Right now, you can get in the door for $11.
Total or per person?
Per person. 2 tickets seated together, $11. Now, if you want to sit like in, let's say decent seats, like not like if you want to be in the mid level, if you will.
What if I wanted to sit like?
Yeah, if you want to sit in the 200 level, you're looking at $200 a piece.
What if I wanted to sit like say near the home television broadcast team?
Well, nobody's teams are traveling.
I understand.
$788.
All right, so there's your range. But hey, if you want to be,
if you want to be an elitist,
well, no. I mean, like, but that your range is $11 to what type of Vegas experience do you want?
My
right?
apologies.
Like,
You're right. Yeah,
that's what I
mean, realistically, though, if you want to have if you want to sit like in the mid level and not have the game be a rumor from where you are, then yeah, you're looking at probably $150, $200 tickets.
You can win that at the blackjack table, though.
That's right.
But that's the other angle, right? With these NFL games, like if you're a team, like everybody knows I'm a Chiefs fan, but the Raiders are always on the schedule. That's my next destination trip. I want to go to Vegas for a game.
Right.
For the NBA, if Vegas is going to be the permanent destination for this thing, if you give fans a little bit more time, that becomes a destination trip all of a sudden.
That's fair.
Because you're experiencing Vegas and you're seeing your team compete for the NBA
That's
Cup.
a good way of saying it, for sure, right? And I'm curious how many people that live in Henderson, Nevada, for example, are going to go over there and check it out. You know what I mean? Just as something to do. So we'll see. You'll see what the crowd's going to be. The good news is for John tomorrow, that means that he is going to be off at 4:30 because pregame at 4:30, game will tip at 5 o'clock. John just hurriedly came in here.
I'm in here. Hey, I'll tell you what, if they're going to hijack my time tomorrow, they better play. Seriously. Or they're going to get ass ripped.
Really?
On Friday. Yeah, they better play.
It's going to be 175 to 173.
That's 90 minutes of my time.
Right.
That's high value right there.
That coffee you got going on there?
It is, yeah. And this
Sounds
Ron
like you already
Colley
drank it.
Royals cup right there that they gave me.
Oh.
Shout out to the Ron Colley Royals.
There you go. Go Royals.
I love them right down
right?
there. The Royals.
You got a
everybody.
big show lined up, John?
We got Josh Schertz, the head coach of Indiana State. He's an awesome dude. Did you know that he is a grad of Florida Atlantic? He, like me, is a good friend of Dusty May, and we talked about a world of creating a good team and the transfer portal, utilizing that and making sure you fend off those that try to get your good players from bigger conferences and bigger teams.
By the way, For those that don't know, before we transition and hand off here, John hates sitting in a seat that somebody else has been sitting in, right?
Is it somebody sitting this?
Okay. No, but what do you think about putting on a sweatshirt that somebody just put their ass all over?
Man, it's good right there.
Come on, man. John sits down on my sweatshirt.
It felt really warm.
This thing's going right through the Lysol spray here.
My right cheek was really warm right there.
I guess it was.
Can you tell where my
Good Lord,
Hey, can you tell where my right ass cheek was right there?
Yeah, I can, actually. John's up next. We're back at noon tomorrow. See you, everybody.
The leaves have fallen. The air is crisp. And